My name is Maddie, and I am 30 years old. Exactly 1 year after my brutal divorce, my former mother-in-law spotted me standing alone in the VIP lounge of Chicago's most exclusive private hospital. She looked me up and down, sneered, and announced loudly that leaving me was the smartest decision her son ever made. She immediately called security to throw me out, bragging that her family was about to sign a massive, highly lucrative contract. I just smiled. She had no clue that the person holding the power to approve or destroy that exact contract was standing right in front of her. 4 minutes later, her arrogant smirk vanished permanently. Before I reveal exactly how I dismantled her perfect illusion, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please do hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to watch a toxic, arrogant family member get the ultimate reality check today. The VIP lounge of Vanguard Health in Chicago was a masterpiece of stunning modern architecture. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, while the interior was lined with imported Italian leather chairs and sleek polished glass tables. I was standing near the espresso bar, reviewing classified financial files on my tablet and adjusting the cuffs of my tailored charcoal gray business suit. It was a completely normal Tuesday morning for me in my role as a senior forensic accountant. That was until a sharp, shrill voice cut through the quiet hum of the lounge, dragging me straight back to the absolute darkest period of my entire life. Well, look what the cat dragged in. I turned slowly to see Beatrice, my 60-year-old former mother-in-law, marching aggressively straight toward me. She was dripping in gaudy designer wear, sporting a loud, obnoxious floral blazer, paired with an excessive amount of heavy gold jewelry that clinked loudly with every step. Her eyes scanned my outfit, her mouth twisting into a familiar, cruel smirk. "Are you lost, Maddie? The charity ward is down on the first floor." She stopped a few feet away, crossing her arms over her chest. "Or did you follow us here to beg for a handout?" I kept my expression completely neutral, my fingers tightening slightly around my tablet. Beatrice did not wait for an answer. She looked around the luxurious lounge, ensuring the other wealthy patients could hear her. "Leaving you was the smartest decision my son ever made," she announced loudly. I felt a brief flash of the old pain, but it quickly dissolved into cold clarity. Beatrice loved an audience. She stepped closer, her voice dripping with absolute venom as she continued her public performance. "I suppose you are here looking for discounted medical care. It must be hard living on the streets after Spencer took everything." Her words were explicitly designed to humiliate me, weaponizing the nightmare I had survived exactly 1 year ago. When my ex-husband divorced me, he did not just walk away. With Beatrice coaching his every single move, he systematically destroyed my life. He used shady legal loopholes to dump a mountain of fabricated corporate debt onto my name. I remembered the cold, rainy night they changed the locks on our house, throwing my hastily packed bags onto the front lawn. They left me destitute with nothing but the clothes on my back and a ruined credit score. I remembered pleading with them, explaining that I had helped build their company from the ground up. I had worked late nights balancing their ledgers and securing their initial funding, but Spencer just smirked, and Beatrice had stood on the porch that night laughing as I cried in the pouring rain. She told me I was a useless burden and that her son was destined for greatness without me dragging him down. Now standing in the pristine hospital lounge, she thought she was looking at that same broken, desperate woman she had discarded. She could not fathom that the intense trauma they inflicted on me had become the exact fuel I needed to rebuild my entire life. "You have nerve showing your face here," Beatrice hissed, pointing at my suit. "Did you buy that at a thrift store? Listen to me very carefully. You need to leave right now." She waved her hand, signaling to hospital security guards near the elevators. "Security, we have a problem," she yelled. The guards exchanged glances but began walking over. Beatrice glared at me. "My family is having a very important morning, Maddie. We are waiting to sign a life-or-death medical equipment contract today. It is a multi-million-dollar deal that is going to secure our company for the next decade." She took a step closer, lowering her voice into a vicious, menacing whisper. "Spencer Business has been struggling, and this contract is the only thing that will save our company from total bankruptcy." I will not let a penniless vagrant like you ruin our big moment. Get out of my sight before I have you officially arrested for trespassing." The security guards were halfway across the lounge, their radios crackling. Beatrice crossed her arms, her chest puffed out with arrogant pride as she waited for me to cower or run away in tears. People at the nearby tables had stopped drinking their coffee, openly staring at the scene unfolding. A wealthy-looking older couple sitting next to us whispered to each other, their eyes darting between my professional attire and Beatrice's aggressive stance. I did not even move a single muscle of my body. I did not ever break eye contact with my former mother-in-law. Instead, I stood my ground, feeling a highly thrilling sense of anticipation building deep within my chest. The game she thought she was playing had finally ended 12 months ago, and the new game had just begun right now. My name is Maddie, and I am 30 years old. 1 year after my brutal divorce, my former mother-in-law spotted me standing alone in the VIP lounge of Chicago's most exclusive private hospital. She sneered and announced loudly that leaving me was the smartest decision her son ever made. She called security to throw me out, bragging her family was about to sign a massive contract. I just smiled. She had no clue the person holding the power to approve or destroy that exact contract was standing right in front of her. 4 minutes later, her arrogant smirk vanished permanently. Before I reveal how I dismantled her perfect illusion, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever watched a toxic family member get the ultimate reality check. The security guards were mere inches away, their hands reaching out to grab my arms. Beatrice was vibrating with wicked glee. Her floral blazer shifted as she leaned forward to watch my humiliating exit. She took out her smartphone, ready to record the exact moment her former daughter-in-law was thrown onto the cold Chicago pavement like common trash. I stood still, waiting for the moment to speak. Before the guards could lay a finger on my suit jacket, frosted glass double doors at the far end of the lounge swung violently open. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The low chatter of the wealthy patients died down into a sudden silence. The security guards stopped dead in their tracks, dropping their hands and snapping to attention. Alexander Reed walked into the room. He was 45 years old and carried an aura of absolute intimidating authority. As the billionaire chairman of the hospital board, he owned the ground we were standing on. Beatrice recognized him instantly. She shoved the security guards out of her way, abandoning her crusade to have me arrested. Her entire demeanor flipped from vicious predator to desperate sycophant in a second. She plastered on a grotesquely sweet smile and hurried toward him. "Mr. Reed," she gushed, "what an honor to see you this morning. I am Beatrice Spencer, mother. We have our final contract meeting in just an hour, and I wanted to thank you for considering our medical equipment. We are fully ready to revolutionize your surgical wings and provide the best technology your hospital has ever seen." Alexander did not even break his stride. He stepped around Beatrice as if she were nothing but an inconvenient obstacle, her syrupy smile freezing painfully in place as he walked right past her without offering a single glance. He headed directly toward me. He stopped in front of me. To the horror of my former mother-in-law, the billionaire chairman bowed his head slightly in a gesture of profound professional respect. He held out a thick black leather portfolio stamped with the official Vanguard Health Golden Seal. "Good morning, Maddie Alexander," said his voice carrying effortlessly across the dead-silent VIP lounge. "I have the finalized audit reports you requested regarding the prospective vendors." He handed the heavy portfolio to me. I took it, feeling the satisfying weight of the documents inside. "Madam Director of Forensic Accounting, I leave this matter entirely in your capable hands." Alexander continued, projecting his voice so every person in the room could hear. "The board and I trust your judgment explicitly. The power to approve or terminate their company contract is entirely yours." The sound of Beatrice dropping her handbag echoed sharply across the tile floor. I watched with immense satisfaction as color drained instantly from her face. Her skin turned a sickly ashen gray. She stumbled backward, her knees hitting a sleek glass side table to keep her from collapsing entirely. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no sound came out. The woman who just seconds ago had threatened to have me arrested was now staring at me as if I had sprouted a second head. She looked frantically from Alexander to me, then back to the portfolio in my hands. The same portfolio that contained the life or death contract for her failing family business. I offered her a polite smile. The look of pure terror in her eyes was a masterpiece. She realized in that exact moment that the penniless vagrant she had just tried to throw out into the street was holding the literal financial guillotine over her entire family legacy. If I said the word, they would lose everything. Before Beatrice could attempt to stammer out an apology or fully process the shock of the situation, a soft, melodic chime rang through the lounge. The polished steel doors of the private VIP elevator slid smoothly open, revealing the next players in this unfolding tragedy. Spencer stepped out into the lobby. My ex-husband looked exactly as arrogant and self-important as the day he threw me out of our home. He wore a flashy suit, his chest puffed out with unearned confidence. Clinging tightly to his arm was Brittany, his 25-year-old mistress. She was heavily pregnant, wearing a dress that accentuated her swollen belly. They looked like the perfect triumphant couple stepping in to claim their massive hospital contract. Spencer scanned the quiet room and immediately locked eyes with me. He did not notice his mother standing pale, trembling, and speechless against the glass table. He did not notice the powerful billionaire board chairman standing respectfully at my side. He only saw his discarded ex-wife standing in the middle of a high-end hospital wing where she clearly did not belong. A cruel, familiar smirk spread slowly across his face. He puffed out his chest, leaned down to whisper something into Brittany's ear that made her giggle, and started walking purposefully in my direction. He adjusted his suit jacket, clearly preparing to deliver a brutal public humiliation, completely unaware he was strutting blindly into an inescapable death trap. Spencer closed the distance between the elevator and the espresso bar with the heavy, practiced swagger of a man who firmly believed he owned the entire building. His footsteps echoed sharply against the polished Italian tile, cutting through the tense silence of the lounge. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit that clung tightly to his shoulders. As he raised his left hand to adjust his silk tie, the heavy gold face of a brand-new Rolex caught the morning light. It was a deliberate, highly calculated gesture. He wanted to make sure the very first thing I saw was the undeniable proof of his immense unchecked wealth. He chuckled, a harsh and grating sound that grated on my nerves. He let go of Brittany, who was busy smoothing her expensive maternity dress. She eyed me with a mixture of deep confusion and haughty disdain, clearly wondering why her wealthy partner was acknowledging someone she deemed beneath them. Spencer leaned in close to me, his expensive cologne completely overpowering the rich scent of roasted coffee beans floating through the lounge. He pointed an accusatory finger at the sleek black portfolio resting securely in my hands. "Running errands for the actual executives now," Spencer sneered. He did not bother keeping his voice down, wanting the entire room to witness his perceived superiority. "I always knew you would end up doing grunt work, delivering coffee, carrying folders for people who actually matter, and fetching dry cleaning. It is a fitting trajectory for someone with absolutely zero real ambition or business sense." He glanced over his shoulder, expecting to share a triumphant, mocking laugh with his mother. Beatrice was still frozen tightly against the glass side table, her face the exact color of wet chalk. Her eyes were wide with unadulterated terror, and her hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were stark white. She opened her mouth to warn him to stop him from digging his own grave, but her throat was completely seized with panic. Spencer completely misread her silent, suffocating horror. He assumed she was simply distressed by my physical presence in the same room as her. "You have severely upset my mother just by standing here," Spencer stated, his tone turning instantly menacing and cold. "You are going to get down on your knees right now and apologize to her for ruining our morning. Do it, or I will personally have my private security team physically drag you out of this hospital." I stared right back at him, my face a mask of absolute unbreakable calm. "I am not apologizing to anyone, Spencer." His jaw clenched tight. The thick veins in his neck bulged visibly against his stiff white collar. His unchecked arrogance swelled to dangerous, blinding levels. He was so consumed by his own ego that he remained completely blind to the very obvious presence of Alexander Reed, the billionaire board chairman, standing quietly just a few feet away. Spencer simply could not resist the urge to twist the knife. He needed to remind me of the absolute financial and emotional devastation he had purposefully caused exactly 1 year ago. "You still have that same pathetic, useless defiance," Spencer mocked, leaning even closer, so I could feel the angry heat of his breath. "Where exactly did that defiance get you last year? Nowhere. You walked away with absolutely nothing. My dirty lawyers wiped the floor with you in that courtroom. They were worth every single penny of the premium retainers I paid them to bury your claims and ruin your credit." He took a dramatic step back, gesturing grandly to his expensive bespoke suit, his gleaming watch, and his heavily pregnant mistress. "While you were crying in the courtroom about fairness and equity, I was busy moving millions of dollars into untouchable offshore accounts. The Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Belize. My legal team set up 5 different invisible shell companies before you even realized I was filing for the divorce. I hid every single valuable asset we built together, and I purposefully left you to drown in a mountain of fabricated corporate debt. I won Maddie. I have the massive mansion, I have the booming company, and I have a beautiful young woman who can actually give me a proper heir." He tapped the crystal face of his Rolex aggressively. "This watch alone is worth substantially more than you will ever earn in a decade of running pathetic errands in this hospital. Now get on your knees and apologize to my mother before I destroy what little dignity you have left." I did not flinch. I did not blink. I did not show a single ounce of the intimidation he so desperately craved. Instead, I slowly and deliberately opened the heavy black leather portfolio Alexander Reed had just handed me. The crisp, thick white pages inside were filled with long columns of tiny numbers, specific dates, and highly classified international banking seals. "It is highly fascinating that you bring up your hidden offshore accounts today, Spencer," I said. My voice was incredibly steady, sharp as a razor, and it echoed clearly across the dead-silent VIP lounge. I looked down at the very first page of the Vanguard Health Vendor Audit Report. "Let us talk about those clever shell companies of yours, specifically Apex Global Holdings located in the Cayman Islands. Account routing number ending in 4729. Spencer stopped smiling instantly. His eyes darted nervously to the thick portfolio resting in my hands. I turned the page, my voice ringing out with lethal, undeniable precision. "Or perhaps we should discuss Vanguard Medical Innovations in Belize, a highly creative name for a shell company, by the way. On October 14th of last year, exactly 2 days before our divorce was legally finalized, you authorized a fraudulent wire transfer of $2.4 million from your primary domestic corporate account directly into that Belizean trust." The blood began to drain rapidly from Spencer's face, starting at his cheeks and spreading down his neck. The arrogant, swaggering posture completely vanished, replaced by a sudden, rigid paralysis. I did not stop. I read the next line, my tone as cold and unforgiving as absolute ice. "Then there is the troubling matter of the Swiss banking trust. On November 3rd, you routed $800,000 through a dummy corporation registered to a false commercial address in Delaware before funneling it directly into an anonymous account in Geneva. That money was specifically earmarked by investors for medical research and development, yet it magically disappeared into your private offshore portfolio." Spencer opened his mouth, but his voice completely failed him. He began to sweat profusely. A thick, cold sheen of perspiration broke out across his forehead, gleaming uncomfortably under the bright, modern hospital lounge lights. He swallowed hard, his throat working frantically as he tried to process the nightmare unfolding around him. "How do you know those exact numbers?" he finally managed to stammer. His voice had completely lost its booming bravado, dropping into a panicked, raspy whisper. "Those accounts are legally sealed. My lawyers absolutely guaranteed they were completely untraceable. Who gave you that classified file?" I snapped the heavy black portfolio shut. The sharp cracking sound echoed like a gunshot through the tense room. "No one gave me this file by accident," I stated, stepping squarely into his personal space, forcing him to look directly into my eyes. "I am not a hospital errand girl, Spencer. I am the Senior Director of Forensic Accounting for Vanguard Health. I was personally hired by the Board of Directors to audit every single vendor applying for a contract with this hospital. I held the portfolio up directly in front of his face, tapping the golden hospital seal embossed on the cover. This folder contains my final, irreversible assessment of your supposedly successful medical equipment company. Every single fraudulent transfer, every hidden offshore account, and every single dime of laundered money you just bragged about hiding during our divorce is documented right here in black and white. Spencer began to shake uncontrollably. His eyes widened in absolute soul-crushing terror as the catastrophic reality of the situation finally crashed down upon him. He looked past my shoulder and finally noticed Alexander Reed, the billionaire chairman of the hospital board, watching the entire exchange with an expression of deep, utter disgust. Spencer suddenly realized I was not a helpless, destitute victim waiting to be publicly humiliated. I was the financial executioner holding the sharpest axe over his entire fraudulent empire, and he had just willingly placed his own head directly onto the chopping block. The sheer gravity of his catastrophic blunder finally registered in Spencer's eyes. I watched his pupils dilate as his breathing turned shallow and erratic. He was completely cornered. The billionaire board chairman of Vanguard Health had just personally witnessed his arrogant, boastful confession to international money laundering and corporate fraud. Spencer's gaze darted frantically from my face to Alexander Reed, and then down to the thick, black portfolio resting securely in my hands. In his desperate, panic-stricken mind, destroying the physical file was his only remaining option. He let out a guttural sound of pure, unadulterated rage and lunged forward. His heavy designer shoes scraped sharply against the polished Italian tile as he threw his entire body weight toward me. His hands were outstretched like claws, desperately trying to snatch the highly classified financial documents right out of my grasp to tear them to shreds. I did not retreat. I simply shifted my weight, turning my shoulder to shield the portfolio, fully prepared to defend the hospital's property. But I did not have to lift a single finger to protect myself. Before Spencer could even close the distance between us, the heavy mahogany door of an adjacent private consultation office swung open with a resounding thud. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped effortlessly into the corridor, his immaculate white lab coat billowing slightly with the forceful momentum of his entrance. It was Jamal. At 35 years old, the esteemed chief of neurosurgery carried an unmistakable presence that commanded immediate respect. As a brilliant African-American man who had fought tooth and nail to reach the absolute pinnacle of his highly competitive medical field, Jamal had zero tolerance for nonsense, especially within the pristine walls of his own surgical wing. He also happened to be Spencer's brother-in-law, married to Spencer's overly entitled and heavily privileged sister Caroline. Jamal moved with the precise, calculated speed of a seasoned trauma surgeon. He stepped directly between me and my charging ex-husband. He raised one large, steady hand and planted it firmly square in the middle of Spencer's chest. The physical impact stopped Spencer dead in his tracks, knocking the wind right out of him and sending him stumbling several steps backward. Spencer gasped for air, his face flushing a deep, furious crimson red. He glared at Jamal, looking entirely bewildered by the physical intervention. He quickly tried to leverage their familial ties, expecting blind, unquestioning loyalty from a man his family had routinely treated with thinly veiled condescension and blatant disrespect at every single holiday gathering. "Jamal, what do you think you are doing?" Spencer barked aggressively, fixing the lapels of his suit jacket. "Get out of my way right now. Tell that crazy ex-wife of mine to hand over those files. She is trying to ruin our company contract with some kind of fake fabricated financial audit. You are family Jamal. Tell her to back off and push my contract through the approval process immediately." Jamal did not flinch. He did not show a single ounce of familial solidarity. Instead, his dark eyes narrowed with absolute freezing contempt. He stood perfectly tall, acting as an impenetrable brick wall between me and Spencer's volatile, escalating panic. Jamal reached into the deep pocket of his white coat and calmly pulled out his hospital-issued smartphone. He tapped the glowing screen once, scrolling through a digital document before looking back up at his arrogant, sweating brother-in-law. I am not telling Maddie to do anything, Spencer, Jamal stated, his voice resonating with deep, unwavering authority that demanded the attention of everyone in the lounge. In fact, I have been meticulously reviewing her forensic data for the last 45 minutes inside that office, and I just hit the send button on my final executive decision. Spencer froze, a fresh new wave of dread washing over his slick, sweaty features. What decision? He demanded, his voice cracking noticeably. Jamal locked eyes with him and delivered the fatal blow with lethal surgical precision. Spencer, I just officially rejected your company's garbage equipment from my surgical wing. Maddie, your financial assessment was absolutely spot on. The words echoed heavily through the VIP lounge, finalizing the utter destruction of Spencer's corrupt business empire. Jamal shook his head in sheer disgust, addressing the entire room, but keeping his eyes locked firmly on the pathetic, trembling man standing in front of him. I had my top medical engineers review the technical specifications you submitted right alongside Maddie's financial audit. Jamal continued, refusing to let Spencer get a single word in edgewise. Your supposedly state-of-the-art surgical monitors are built with incredibly cheap, faulty components manufactured by a shady shell company in Southeast Asia. You explicitly cut corners on life-saving technology to maximize your own greedy profit margins, and then you tried to hide the substandard manufacturing costs by laundering the funds through the Cayman Islands, just like Maddie's report detailed. If I had approved your defective machines for my operating rooms, innocent patients could have died on my table. You are an absolute fraud, Spencer. The Vanguard Health contract is officially dead, and your company is permanently blacklisted from doing business anywhere within this hospital network. Spencer looked exactly as though he had been physically struck by a massive freight train. His entire arrogant world was rapidly collapsing in real time. The multi-million-dollar contract he so desperately needed to save his sinking company was completely gone. His illegal offshore accounts were fully exposed to federal authorities. The billionaire chairman he needed to impress had witnessed his entire pathetic meltdown. He stood completely paralyzed, gasping for air, like a fish thrown onto dry land, staring at Jamal with wide, uncomprehending, terrified eyes. Then out of nowhere, a high-pitched, piercing scream shattered the heavy, stunned silence of the corridor. Brittany, who had been silently watching her wealthy meal ticket disintegrate before her very eyes, suddenly sprang into frantic action. Realizing that the luxurious financial empire she had happily home-wrecked for was currently burning down to the ground, she instantly defaulted to pure, unadulterated manipulation. She forcefully doubled over, clutching her heavily pregnant belly with both of her perfectly manicured hands, and let out another theatrical, ear-splitting shriek of fake exaggerated pain. "Oh my God!" Brittany wailed, squeezing her eyes shut and dramatically dropping to her knees on the polished floor. The baby. The intense stress is hurting the baby. Spencer, do something right now. I am going into labor. It was the most blatantly staged, over-the-top performance I had ever witnessed in my entire life. It was a desperate, highly calculated distraction tactic designed entirely to stop the devastating financial conversation and pull the attention away from Spencer's monumental ruin. She flailed her arms, pointing aggressively toward the main VIP reception area, her voice shrill and fiercely demanding. "I need top doctors right now!" Brittany screamed, thrashing wildly against the tile. "Get me out of this hallway. Wheel me up to the presidential birthing suite immediately. The one that costs $10,000 a night. I demand the VIP suite right now." Brittany was thrashing wildly on the polished Italian tile, her theatrical wails echoing off the frosted glass of the VIP lounge. Spencer finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. The devastating reality of his blacklisted company was briefly overshadowed by the immediate screaming spectacle of his mistress. He rushed to her side, wrapping his arms under her shoulders and hoisting her up from the floor. "Get a wheelchair right now," Spencer barked at no one in particular, frantically dragging Brittany toward the main VIP reception desk, just outside the lounge doors. "My fiancé is going into labor and she needs immediate medical attention." I followed them closely, sliding the thick Vanguard Health portfolio securely under my arm. Jamal stayed right beside me, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the pathetic display with absolute clinical detachment. At the sprawling marble reception desk, the chaos rapidly escalated. Brittany leaned heavily against the pristine counter, pounding her fists against the expensive stone surface. "I need the presidential birthing suite right this second," she shrieked at the highly startled receptionist. "The one with the hydrotherapy tub, the private chef, and the panoramic views. I am carrying the Spencer heir, and I will absolutely not be kept waiting in some public hallway like a commoner. Do you know who my partner is?" The receptionist, a sharp professional woman named Sarah, who knew exactly who I was, glanced over Brittany's shoulder and locked eyes with me. She saw the heavy black portfolio under my arm and immediately understood the shifting power dynamic in the room. Sarah did not touch her keyboard. She did not reach for a VIP room key. She simply stood perfectly still behind the marble counter waiting for my silent command. "Did you not hear her?" Beatrice hissed, suddenly appearing at the desk. My former mother-in-law had apparently managed to scrape her shattered pride off the lounge floor. She pushed aggressively past Spencer, her loud floral blazer crinkling as she slammed her hands onto the counter. She was completely desperate to regain control of the narrative, intentionally ignoring the massive fact that Jamal had just permanently terminated their multi-million-dollar lifeline. Beatrice reached into her oversized designer handbag and whipped out a heavy, solid metal corporate black card. She slapped it down onto the marble counter with a loud, aggressive clack. She slid it forcefully toward Sarah, but her venomous glare was fixed entirely on me. "Put the entire premium floor on lockdown and open the presidential suite immediately," Beatrice commanded, lifting her chin with haughty arrogance. "Charge the $10,000 nightly deposit directly to my corporate account. We do not need permission or clearance from a glorified paper pusher who clearly does not belong in this wing." Beatrice took a menacing step closer to me, her eyes narrowing into cold, hateful slits. She pointed a perfectly manicured fingernail directly at my chest, ready to deliver what she firmly believed would be a crushing, paralyzing blow. "Do not look so smug," Maddie Beatrice sneered, her voice dripping with absolute malice. "You think having a fancy new job title makes you superior to us. You think you can stand there in your cheap suit and judge my family. But we all know the real reason my son threw you out into the street. You are barren. You could not even breed a proper heir to carry on our legacy. Spencer had to find a real woman to give him the family you were entirely incapable of providing." The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of her words hung heavily in the air. Spencer looked away suddenly, finding the blank reception desk incredibly interesting. He did not have the basic human decency to step in and stop his mother from weaponizing the darkest, most agonizing tragedy of my entire life. I looked at Beatrice, then down at Brittany, who had miraculously stopped screaming just long enough to shoot me a smug, triumphant smirk from across the counter. They wanted to talk about family legacy. They wanted to talk about my supposed failure to provide an heir. They desperately wanted to rewrite our history to justify their grotesque, unforgivable betrayal. I did not break down. I did not shrink back or shed a single tear. The searing pain of that specific memory had long since crystallized into pure, unyielding armor. I looked straight into Beatrice's eyes and let the horrifying, bitter truth hang in the silent space between us. I was never barren. Exactly 14 months ago, I was pregnant with Spencer Child. I had discovered the pregnancy right when his medical equipment company began mysteriously hemorrhaging cash. Spencer came to me, panicked, crying fake tears about aggressive creditors, failing supply chains, and imminent bankruptcy. As a loyal, devoted wife, I took on the absolute entirety of the burden. I kept my demanding full-time accounting job, picked up a second consulting gig in the evenings, and worked grueling weekend shifts, managing books for a local real estate firm. I was working 90 hours a week to keep our household afloat and quietly pay down the massive debts he claimed were destroying his mental health. I did not know those corporate debts were completely fabricated. I did not know the money I was frantically transferring into his accounts was being secretly funneled to offshore shell companies in Belize and Switzerland. And I certainly did not know that while I was working myself to the absolute bone to save our family, my husband was spending his free afternoons in high-end boutique hotels with his 24-year-old assistant, Brittany. The intense, relentless physical and mental stress of working 3 jobs to fund his fraudulent cheating lifestyle ultimately caused my body to completely give out. I collapsed alone in my home office late one night. I suffered a horrific stress-induced miscarriage while Spencer was miles away deliberately ignoring my frantic, desperate phone calls because he was busy sleeping with his mistress. When I woke up in the sterile hospital room, completely empty and devastated, Spencer did not bring flowers or apologies. He brought a ruthless legal team and divorce papers. He dumped his fake corporate debt entirely onto my name, drained our joint savings, and walked out, leaving me to face the physical trauma and total financial ruin completely alone. Beatrice knew all of this. She knew exactly what her son had done, and she had gleefully helped him cover his financial tracks. Now she was maliciously using my dead child as a weapon to intimidate me into authorizing a luxury hospital suite for the very woman who had helped destroy my marriage. I looked down at the heavy black corporate card Beatrice had slapped onto the counter. The brushed metal gleamed brightly under the recessed lighting. It was tied directly to the very same fraudulent company accounts I had just spent the last 48 hours tearing apart piece by piece. I looked back up at Beatrice, my face a mask of absolute freezing indifference. "You are right about one thing, Beatrice," I said, my voice echoing with lethal calm across the reception desk. "I am not a mother. Which means I have absolutely zero maternal obligation to protect you, your son, or your fraudulent legacy from what is about to happen next." Beatrice scoffed at my warning, her face twisting into a sneer of pure aristocratic disdain. She turned her back on me, completely deliberately dismissing my existence, and shoved her heavy black corporate card closer to Sarah, the receptionist. "Process the $10,000 deposit right this second." Beatrice barked, her voice echoing sharply against the pristine marble walls of the VIP lounge. "And send a top-tier medical team down here immediately. My grandson is about to be born, and we are absolutely done listening to the bitter, jealous ramblings of a discarded ex-wife." Sarah did not look intimidated in the slightest. She maintained her pristine professional composure, picked up the solid metal card, and smoothly swiped it through the terminal. The machine processed the transaction for 3 agonizing seconds before emitting a sharp, loud beep. A bright red error message flashed aggressively across the digital screen. "I am sorry, ma'am," Sarah stated, her tone entirely devoid of actual sorrow. "This card has been declined." Beatrice let out a harsh, incredulous gasp, her eyes widening in genuine shock. "Declined? That is a limitless corporate account. There are literally millions of dollars sitting in that portfolio. Your machine is clearly broken. Swipe it again." Sarah dutifully ran the thick metal edge through the card reader a second time. The exact same sharp beep echoed through the quiet reception area. The red light flashed twice, illuminating Beatrice's suddenly pale face. "Declined," Sarah repeated, pushing the card back across the smooth marble counter. "The transaction cannot be completed." "This is absolutely ridiculous!" Spencer roared, stepping forward and physically shoving his mother out of the way. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and yanked out his own platinum card, slamming it down next to Beatrice's rejected plastic with a loud, aggressive clack. "The banking system must be experiencing a network glitch. Run my personal platinum account. And you better throw in a complimentary bottle of expensive champagne for the presidential suite after putting my family through this massive, unacceptable inconvenience." Sarah picked up Spencer's platinum card. She swiped it. The machine beeped aggressively. The red light flared once again. "Declined," Sarah announced, her voice echoing slightly in the vast, tense space. Chaos instantly erupted in the hospital lobby. Spencer completely lost what little remained of his fragile, carefully constructed composure. He slammed both of his heavy fists down onto the reception desk, screaming at the top of his lungs. He demanded that Sarah input the numbers manually. He aggressively cursed the banking system, shouting wildly about his massive wealth, his untouchable credit score, and his absolute supremacy. He threatened to buy the entire hospital network just so he could fire her on the spot. Down on the floor, Brittany suddenly realized her highly theatrical performance was not getting the immediate luxury service she demanded. She propped herself up on one elbow, her fake, exaggerated labor pains briefly paused as she glared at her flailing partner. "Spencer, fix this right now!" Brittany screeched, her voice grating and painfully shrill. I am not having my baby in a standard filthy delivery room. Use another card, call your wealth manager, do whatever it takes to get me into the VIP wing right this second. I am trying, Spencer yelled back, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of purple with unadulterated rage. The stupid terminal is locked up. I stood perfectly still, watching them tear each other apart over a useless piece of plastic. I reached into my bag and pulled out my secure hospital-issued tablet. I unlocked the screen, bringing up the master financial dashboard that connected directly to the federal database. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. Stop yelling at the receptionist, Spencer, I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through his frantic screaming like a surgical scalpel. The machine works perfectly fine. Spencer spun around his chest, heaving his expensive silk tie askew. He glared at me, his eyes wild and utterly desperate. What did you do? He demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous gravelly register. What did you do to my accounts? I held up my tablet, turning the bright digital screen so he could clearly see the long, detailed list of his corporate and personal bank accounts. Next to every single account name, from his domestic checking to his offshore shell companies, was a bold, glaring red lock icon. I gave him a lethal, unyielding smile. You seriously thought I was just a hospital auditor? I stated, savoring the absolute devastating destruction washing over his face. You thought Vanguard Health just let anyone dig freely into international shell companies. Spencer, I am an IRS authorized forensic accountant. I was brought in specifically because your highly suspicious financial activity flagged major federal alerts. Beatrice let out a strangled, breathless gasp, clutching her chest as if she had just been physically shot. I kept my eyes locked on Spencer, watching his entire reality shatter into a million tiny, irreparable pieces. I froze all of your corporate and personal accounts exactly 15 minutes ago for suspected money laundering and massive tax evasion. Every single dime you stole, every asset you hid, and every cent you currently claim to own is locked tight by the federal government. You have zero access to your wealth. You are completely broke. Spencer stumbled backward, hitting the marble counter with a heavy thud. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The arrogant, untouchable billionaire was gone, replaced entirely by a terrified, broken man, realizing he had just lost his entire kingdom. I turned my attention down to Brittany, who was staring up at me with wide, horrified eyes. The sudden realization that she had destroyed a marriage to secure a wealthy billionaire, only to end up with a penniless criminal, was written plainly across her heavily contoured face. There is no presidential suite, I told her, my tone completely devoid of any sympathy. I looked back at Sarah, the receptionist. Wheel her down to the public ward. She can wait for a standard bed just like everyone else. Before Brittany could unleash a new wave of furious, panicked screams, the heavy, automatic sliding doors at the entrance of the VIP lobby violently burst open. The sudden noise caused everyone to jump. Caroline Spencer's 34-year-old sister sprinted wildly through the entrance. She was usually the picture of perfectly poised, high society elegance, but right now she was a complete disaster. Her designer heels clicked frantically against the tile. Her hair was a messy, tangled bird's nest, and her expensive designer coat was buttoned crookedly. She was completely hyperventilating, struggling to pull oxygen into her lungs as she bolted straight past her husband, Jamal. She completely ignored Spencer. She ignored Brittany thrashing on the floor. She ran directly to her mother. Caroline grabbed Beatrice by both arms, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging deep into the fabric of her mother's floral blazer. Her eyes were wide with sheer, unadulterated panic. "Mom!" Caroline gasped, leaning in close, her voice a frantic, breathless whisper that carried loudly across the dead-silent lobby. "Mom, the financial police are raiding the mansion." Caroline's words hung suspended in the sterile hospital air. The financial police. A raid. The absolute finality of that statement severed whatever fragile thread of sanity Spencer had left. He did not freeze. He did not surrender. He completely and violently snapped. Before Jamal could intervene, before the hospital security guards stationed near the elevators could even register the sudden shift in the atmosphere, Spencer lunged at me. His heavy hand clamped down on my wrist like a jagged steel vice, his grip instantly bruising and desperate. He yanked me forward with a violent, terrifying force that nearly threw me off balance. I stumbled but quickly caught my footing as he dragged me forcefully away from the reception desk and straight toward the adjacent glass-walled meeting room. The heavy door slammed shut behind us with a resounding crack, instantly cutting off the chaotic screaming noise of the lobby. Spencer shoved me backward until my shoulders hit the cold, unyielding glass panel. He planted both of his hands against the wall on either side of my head, effectively trapping me in the corner. His chest was heaving. His eyes were wide, feral, and completely unhinged. The polished, arrogant billionaire facade was entirely gone. In his place stood a cornered, desperate animal completely stripped of his gilded armor. He leaned in so close I could feel the frantic, uneven heat of his breath radiating against my cheek. "You are going to fix this," Spencer snarled, his voice a low, vibrating growl of pure, concentrated malice. "You are going to take out that tablet log back into your federal database and lift the freeze on every single one of my accounts right this second. If you do not reverse this, Maddie, I swear to God I will personally destroy you. I will hire fixers. I will pay people who make problems like you permanently disappear. You have absolutely no idea what I am capable of when my survival is on the line. I will ruin your life. I will end your career, and I will erase you from existence. Unfreeze the money right now." He was shaking violently, his knuckles bone white against the glass. He actually believed he could still bully his way out of a federal indictment. He firmly believed that physical intimidation could magically erase years of severe, calculated financial crimes. I stared directly into his wild, bloodshot eyes. I did not shrink away from his massive frame. I did not tremble. I simply smiled, a cold, sharp, and lethal expression that made his aggressive posture falter for a fraction of a second. "I know exactly what you are capable of, Spencer," I replied, my voice ringing with absolute, unshakable authority within the confined space. "I know exactly how far you will go to save your own skin, because I found the paper trail you left 3 years ago. Did you really think I would never find the toxic business loans?" Spencer froze completely. His erratic breathing hitched sharply in his throat. I watched the catastrophic realization hit him like a physical, crippling blow to the stomach. "You forged my signature," I stated, pronouncing every single word with lethal, exacting precision. "3 years ago, when your very first set of shell companies started bleeding cash and facing routine audits, you panicked. You took out 5 massive high-interest corporate loans to cover your tracks and keep the lavish lifestyle afloat. You knowingly falsified the legal documents, and you actively forged my signature as the primary guarantor. Your grand sociopathic master plan was to use your own wife as the ultimate human shield. If your shady empire ever went bankrupt, the banks and the federal authorities would come directly after me. You intentionally set me up to take the fall. You planned to let me face decades in federal prison for your financial fraud while you sailed off to Belize with your mistress and your hidden millions." Spencer backed away from me slowly, his hands dropping weakly from the glass. He looked absolutely nauseated. He knew he was permanently trapped. I had not just caught him hiding money during a divorce. I had caught him actively trying to frame me for his own extensive federal crimes. Before I could deliver the final nail in his coffin, the conference room door clicked open. Caroline slipped inside, pulling the door shut quickly behind her. She looked frantic, her expensive designer coat still hanging crookedly off her shoulders, her hands wringing together in a nervous, desperate rhythm. She had clearly heard the entire exchange through the thick glass door. Yet instead of showing a single ounce of disgust for her brother's horrific actions, she instantly turned her manipulative sights directly onto me. She plastered on a tearful, deeply pleading expression, shifting smoothly into the role of the desperate, begging victim. "Maddie, please!" Caroline begged, her voice dripping with toxic, manufactured sweetness. "You have to stop this right now. You are tearing our entire family apart. We took you in when you had nothing. We gave you a beautiful home and a luxurious life you could never have afforded on your own. You owe us family loyalty. You cannot just destroy my brother over some silly financial mistakes." I stared at her, completely astounded by the sheer, breathtaking audacity of her gaslighting. She stepped closer, reaching out to grasp my hand with fake, sickening affection. "Think about Brittany," Caroline pleaded, pointing frantically through the glass wall to where the mistress was still causing a massive scene on the lobby floor. "Think about her unborn baby. You cannot leave a heavily pregnant woman entirely destitute and homeless. You know exactly what it is like to lose a child, Maddie. Do not force another innocent woman to suffer that exact same agonizing trauma. You know the dark, miserable pain of a miscarriage. Spare the baby from that stress. Just lift the freeze and let my brother fix this quietly." Caroline was actively weaponizing the most traumatic experience of my life, using my dead child as a manipulative bargaining chip to save her corrupt brother from federal prison. Caroline's words hung in the air, a putrid cloud of manipulation. I stared at my former sister-in-law, feeling absolutely no anger, only a profound, chilling pity. She was desperately clinging to a sinking ship, willing to use my deepest trauma to plug the holes of her brother's sinking empire. I took a slow step forward, forcing Caroline to retreat against the heavy glass door. "Family loyalty," I repeated, letting the words roll off my tongue with biting precision. "You stood by and watched your brother destroy my life. You knew about his affairs. You knew about his fake debts. You toasted to my misery while spending the money he stole from our joint accounts. Do not ever invoke the memory of my lost child to protect a criminal." Before Caroline could stammer out another pathetic excuse, the glass door was shoved violently open, smacking hard against the metal doorstop. Brittany stumbled into the confined meeting room. Her theatrical wailing had ceased, replaced by genuine, furious panic. She shoved past Caroline, grabbing Spencer by the lapels of his ruined, bespoke suit. "Spencer, fix this right now!" Brittany screeched, her face contorted in selfish rage. I tried to use my own platinum card and the receptionist laughed at me. "Call David. Call your chief financial officer. Tell him to wire the cash for the presidential suite immediately. I am carrying your son. I will not be humiliated like this." Spencer looked wildly at his mistress, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped rat. "David is not answering his phone." Spencer gasped, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "I have been texting him for the last 20 minutes. The accounts are frozen. Everything is gone." "Not exactly everything," a deep, commanding voice echoed from the doorway. Jamal strode into the glass-walled room. The chief of neurosurgery radiated a terrifying clinical calm. He reached back and pulled the heavy door shut, locking us all inside the soundproof space. He walked directly to the center of the sleek glass conference table and slammed a thick manila medical folder down onto the surface. The sharp slap of paper against glass made everyone in the room flinch. "I run this medical facility," Spencer Jamal stated, his voice devoid of any familial warmth. "When your mistress came to our premium maternity ward 2 weeks ago, demanding exclusive top-tier prenatal genetic testing to ensure her precious baby had no defects, she bypassed standard protocol. She used my name to expedite the lab work. Since I am the chief of surgery and technically listed as family, the primary genetic screening results crossed my desk for final administrative sign-off this very morning." Brittany immediately let go of Spencer's suit. Her face turned a sickly, translucent shade of gray. She stumbled backward, her hands dropping from her swollen belly to her sides. "You have absolutely no right to look at my private medical files," Brittany shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical defensive squeal. "That is a massive violation of privacy. I will sue you. I will sue this entire hospital." Jamal ignored her shrieking completely. He opened the folder, his dark eyes locked intensely on his brother-in-law. "The routine non-invasive prenatal testing requires a standard blood draw from the mother and a swab from the purported father to map the genetic markers," Jamal explained with surgical precision. "You submitted your DNA swab last month, Spencer. The lab ran the comparative sequence to check for hereditary anomalies. The results were highly conclusive." Jamal picked up the top sheet of paper and shoved it directly into Spencer's trembling hands. "That baby does not belong to you." Jamal delivered the lethal blow without a single ounce of hesitation. "There is absolutely zero genetic match. You are not the father." Spencer stared blindly at the medical document. His lips moved, trying to form words, but his vocal cords were completely paralyzed. He looked slowly from the genetic test results up to Brittany, who was now backed into the far corner of the glass room, weeping hysterically and shaking her head in frantic denial. "If it is not mine," Spencer whispered, his voice sounding hollow as if his soul had just been entirely scooped out of his body. "Then whose is it?" I looked at Brittany's terrified face, and the final piece of the financial puzzle slammed perfectly into place. The sudden offshore transfers, the missing secondary accounts, the chief financial officer who was conveniently ignoring his phone. "It is David," I stated, the brutal reality echoing loudly in the small room. "Your chief financial officer is the father." Spencer whipped his head toward me, his eyes wide and completely unhinged. "I traced a secondary stream of embezzled funds during my audit," I explained, watching the absolute devastation wash over him. "Millions of dollars were carefully siphoned out of your primary shell companies over the last 6 months and routed into an untraceable trust in the Bahamas. I thought you were just hiding more money for yourself. But it was David. David and Brittany have been quietly robbing you blind right under your arrogant nose. They used your money to fund their own escape, and they used this fake pregnancy to keep you completely distracted while they drained your entire empire dry." The complete and total destruction of Spencer was finally absolute. He had thrown away a loyal wife, destroyed his own lucrative company, and committed massive federal crimes, all for a woman who was actively sleeping with his best friend and stealing his hidden fortune. The grand, powerful billionaire was nothing but a pathetic, gullible pawn in his mistress' scheme. Something inside Spencer fundamentally broke. The last remaining shred of his human sanity simply snapped. He let out a horrifying primal scream. It was a guttural sound of pure violent agony that vibrated through the glass walls. He dropped the medical file, his hands curling into vicious, tight claws. With a terrifying roar, he lunged directly across the conference room at the weeping, cowering Brittany, his hands reaching violently for her throat to strangle her. Just as his fingers brushed her neck, the heavy glass door of the meeting room was violently kicked open. Alexander Reed stood in the doorway, his face carved from solid granite. Flanking the billionaire chairman were two heavily armed FBI agents, their tactical weapons drawn and aimed directly at Spencer's chest. "Step away from the woman and put your hands flat against the glass." The command from the lead FBI agent sliced through the heavy, suffocating tension of the conference room. His tactical weapon remained raised, the laser sight resting squarely in the center of Spencer's chest. Spencer froze instantly. His fingers, hooked and ready to crush Brittany's throat, hovered uselessly in the air. The blinding homicidal rage that had consumed him just seconds prior evaporated, replaced by a stark, paralyzing terror. He slowly raised his hands, his breath hitching in his chest as he backed away from the cowering, sobbing woman on the floor. Alexander Reed stepped fully into the room, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the tactical gear of the agents flanking him. The Vanguard Health chairman surveyed the pathetic scene with freezing, calculated detachment. He glanced at the discarded DNA results, then at the frozen billionaire before finally locking eyes with me. He gave a single approving nod. The trap had been successfully sprung. "Spencer Blackwell," the second federal agent announced, his voice devoid of any emotion. He holstered his weapon and moved swiftly across the room, grabbing Spencer by the shoulder and spinning him roughly against the glass wall. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of corporate fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, and international money laundering." The harsh metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around Spencer's wrists echoed like a gunshot. The sound represented the absolute, definitive end of his gilded empire. Spencer did not fight back. He slumped heavily against the cold glass panel, his face pressed against the transparent surface, his expensive suit wrinkling as the agent expertly patted him down. The untouchable, arrogant man who had thrown me out into the street was now being treated exactly like a common criminal. For 3 seconds, absolute silence reigned. Then Beatrice completely snapped. The sharp click of the handcuffs broke through her state of profound shock. She let out a piercing, hysterical wail that sounded entirely inhuman. It was the desperate, agonizing screech of a matriarch watching her family dynasty burn to the ground. She threw herself violently forward, her floral blazer catching on the edge of the marble table as she scrambled past Jamal and Caroline. "Stop it right now!" Beatrice screamed at the top of her lungs, her arms flailing wildly as she physically threw her body between the federal agents and her son. She clawed desperately at the lead agent's tactical vest, completely oblivious to the massive legal danger she was putting herself in. "Take those filthy things off him. You have absolutely no right to touch my son. Do you have any idea who we are? We are the Blackwell family. We own half of this city." "Ma'am, step back immediately, or you will be charged with assaulting a federal officer and obstruction of justice." The lead agent warned, his tone dangerously low. He easily deflected her manic grasping, using his forearm to create a solid physical barrier. Caroline rushed forward, her face streaked with mascara and tears. She grabbed her mother around the waist, pulling her back with frantic, terrified strength. "Mom, stop it! You are going to get yourself arrested!" But Beatrice was far beyond the reach of logic or reason. She thrashed violently in her daughter's grip. Her perfectly styled hair had fallen into her face, and her aristocratic composure was entirely shattered. She looked wildly around the room, her panicked gaze darting from the unyielding federal agents to Alexander Reed and finally settling directly onto me. In that split second, her maternal desperation mutated into a venomous, calculated survival instinct. If her wealth and status could no longer protect her golden boy, she would use her absolute favorite weapon. She would use me. Beatrice ripped herself free from Caroline's grasp. She took a step toward the agents, pointing a shaking manicured finger straight at my chest. Her eyes were wide, manic, and completely devoid of any moral boundary. "You have the wrong person!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls. "My son is completely innocent. He is the chief executive officer. He handles the high-level vision. He does not touch the day-to-day finances. He is the victim here. She did it." The agents did not move, but their eyes shifted to me. Alexander Reed crossed his arms, watching Beatrice dig her own grave with morbid fascination. "Look at her!" Beatrice continued screaming so hard, her voice began to crack. Maddie was the chief accountant of his medical equipment company for the last 3 years. She had unlimited, unrestricted access to the primary ledgers. She was the one controlling the domestic accounts. She orchestrated the entire thing. Spencer, still pressed against the glass, slowly turned his head. A sickening glimmer of hope flashed in his terrified eyes. He remained completely silent, willing to let his own mother feed me to the wolves if it meant he could walk out of the room a free man. Beatrice was gaining momentum, spinning her desperate, fabricated backstory with terrifying conviction. She set up those offshore shell companies. She transferred the millions to the Bahamas. 3 years ago, when the supply chain failed, she took out those toxic corporate loans and deliberately forged my son's signature on the guarantor forms to cover her tracks. "Ma'am, the evidence we have," the lead agent started, but Beatrice aggressively cut him off. "The evidence is manipulated!" Beatrice wailed, stepping closer to the agent, her finger still aimed like a loaded gun at my face. "She is a certified forensic accountant. She knows exactly how to hide money and how to frame an innocent man. My son wanted to divorce her because she was entirely barren and mentally unstable. She hated him for wanting a real family. She hated Brittany for giving him a child. This entire embezzlement scheme is just a bitter, psychotic revenge plot orchestrated by a scorned, jealous ex-wife." The sheer magnitude of her lie was staggering. Beatrice was actively trying to rewrite the last 3 years of my life. She was looking directly at federal law enforcement and trying to pin a multi-million-dollar international money laundering operation entirely on my shoulders. She was using my professional credentials, my past role at his company, and my physical trauma as the foundational pillars of her grotesque, fabricated narrative. Caroline immediately jumped onto the sinking lifeboat. She let go of her mother and turned to the FBI agents, nodding her head vigorously. "It is true," Caroline cried out, playing the role of the traumatized sister perfectly. "Maddie handled all the books. Spencer trusted her completely because they were married. She exploited his trust. She locked the accounts today just to make it look like she caught him, but she is the real criminal. You have to arrest her, not my brother." I stood perfectly still, clutching my secure hospital tablet. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I did not scramble to deny their psychotic accusations. I let their venomous, desperate lies hang in the sterile air, fully aware that the federal agents flanking Alexander Reed had spent the last 48 hours building an airtight, irrefutable case against the man currently wearing their handcuffs. Beatrice was panting heavily, her chest heaving as she stared at the agents, waiting for them to release her precious son and slap the steel restraints onto my wrists. She truly believed her wealthy aristocratic authority could override federal law. She truly believed she could sacrifice me to save the Blackwell legacy. The lead FBI agent did not even blink. He did not reach for a notepad to record Beatrice's frantic, fabricated accusations. He did not shoot me a suspicious glare or pause his tactical operation to entertain the desperate shrieks of a cornered aristocrat. He simply looked at Beatrice with the cold, bored, unyielding expression of a man who had seen 1,000 wealthy criminals try to lie their way out of a federal indictment. "Step aside, ma'am," the agent commanded, his voice devoid of any patience or respect for her precious social standing. He forcefully brushed past Beatrice's outstretched arm, completely shattering her delusion of absolute authority. He grabbed Spencer by the bicep, yanking him away from the glass wall with a rough, efficient jerk. The heavy steel handcuffs clinked sharply as the agent locked them tighter around Spencer's wrists, ensuring there was absolutely zero room for physical escape. "Spencer Blackwell, you have the right to remain silent," the second agent began, his voice cutting through the ringing silence of the room like a steady, undeniable drumbeat of doom. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Beatrice stood completely frozen, her arms still suspended uselessly in the air where she had been pointing at me. The realization that her massive wealth, her prominent family name, and her vicious lies held absolutely zero power over these men hit her with the force of a freight train. She let out a small, strangled gasp, her eyes darting frantically between the heavily armed agents and her captive, trembling son. Caroline shrank back against the doorframe, suddenly terrified of catching a federal obstruction charge. She pressed her hands over her mouth, watching in muted, paralyzing horror as the agents finished reading her brother his rights. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, moving right into the center of the room. The intense, recessed hospital lighting caught the edge of a small metallic object I pulled from the inner pocket of my tailored suit jacket. It was a heavy military-grade decryption USB drive. I held it up, letting the brushed metal catch the light, making sure every single person in the room saw exactly what had just destroyed their corrupt empire. "Sorry, Beatrice," I stated, my voice echoing with a lethal, crystalline clarity. "I was not unemployed for the last year." Beatrice slowly turned her head toward me, her face pale, slack, and entirely drained of its former haughty arrogance. "I was working deep undercover for the Federal Bureau of Investigation," I revealed, letting the absolute magnitude of those words sink deep into their bones. "When your son abruptly threw me out into the street and dumped his fabricated corporate debt onto my name, he inadvertently triggered a massive red flag in the federal banking network. The IRS immediately flagged the anomalous offshore transfers. The FBI needed an inside expert to untangle the incredibly complex web of international shell companies Spencer had built to hide his stolen assets. They needed someone who intimately knew his business structure, someone who recognized his administrative passwords, and someone he had completely discarded and underestimated. I took another step closer to Beatrice, my eyes locking onto hers with unyielding, righteous triumph. "Every single illegal offshore wire transfer your son made over the last 36 months has been tracked, categorized, and fully decrypted right here on this drive." I continued, my tone sharp and punishing. "I spent the last 12 months working out of a secure federal field office, tearing apart every single fake ledger, every dummy corporation in Belize, and every fraudulent loan document. I found the exact digital fingerprints where Spencer forged my signature. I handed the federal government the entire blueprint of your family's criminal enterprise on a silver platter." Spencer let out a pathetic, whimpering sob. His knees buckled drastically, the federal agents having to physically haul him upright by his arms to keep him from collapsing onto the polished tile floor. I turned my gaze directly onto my former husband, watching his soul completely fracture. Forcing me out of the house to cut your financial ties to me was the dumbest mistake you ever made. By stripping my name off the primary accounts and aggressively isolating me from your domestic assets during the divorce, you legally and completely severed my liability. You gave me total federal immunity, and you provided me with the absolute perfect vantage point to burn your entire world to the ground. Alexander Reed stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with me. The powerful chairman looked down at Spencer with pure, unfiltered disgust. Vanguard Health does not do business with felons. Your company is being seized by the federal government as we speak to pay back your defrauded investors. Your hospital contracts are permanently terminated. You are finished. No, Spencer wailed, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic pitch. Tears streamed rapidly down his face, ruining his arrogant facade. Mom, do something. Caroline, call the lawyers. Call somebody. Move, the lead agent commanded. The two FBI agents grabbed Spencer by his upper arms and began physically dragging him toward the door. Spencer thrashed weakly, his expensive Italian leather shoes dragging uselessly across the floor. He sobbed uncontrollably, crying out for his mother, begging for a wealth manager who was already cooperating with the authorities, and screaming in absolute terror as the reality of his future in a federal penitentiary crashed down upon him. Jamal stepped aside, holding the heavy glass door open as the agents hauled the weeping broken billionaire out of the meeting room and into the main lobby, parading him past the stunned hospital staff and his utterly humiliated mistress. Beatrice watched her golden boy get dragged away in chains. Her mouth hung open in a silent, horrified scream. The invincible Blackwell legacy was officially dead. Her endless supply of stolen money was completely gone. Her son was going to federal prison, and she was going to face relentless scrutiny for her own role in hiding his assets. The sheer overwhelming reality of her total destruction finally registered. It was not a metaphor. It was not a panic attack. The immense crushing stress hit her cardiovascular system with violent, sudden force. Beatrice suddenly gasped, a horrible, wet, choking sound that echoed sharply in the quiet of the room. Her hands shot up, her manicured fingers clawing viciously at the center of her chest, tearing at the expensive silk blouse beneath her floral blazer. Her eyes rolled back wide with genuine, agonizing physical terror. Her knees gave out instantly. She collapsed hard onto the cold hospital floor, her body hitting the tiles with a heavy, sickening thud. She twisted onto her side, fighting for air that simply would not enter her lungs. Jamal! Beatrice screamed, her voice a weak, gurgling rasp of pure agony. She reached a trembling, desperate hand toward her son-in-law. Jamal, please, save me. Save. Her eyes fluttered wildly as a massive, genuine cardiac event ripped through her chest, leaving her writhing on the floor of the very hospital suite she had just arrogantly tried to buy. Beatrice's manicured fingernails scraped frantically against the polished marble floor tiles as her body convulsed. Her breaths came in sharp, ragged gasps, each inhalation sounding like tearing paper in the deafening silence of the glass-walled room. The matriarch of the Blackwell Empire was completely stripped of her aristocratic armor, reduced to a desperate, writhing figure clutching her chest in genuine, agonizing terror. Caroline dropped to her knees beside her mother, her hands hovering uselessly. She was paralyzed by the suddenness of the collapse, her eyes wide with panic. She looked up at her husband, her voice a high, terrified squeak. Jamal, do something. She's having a heart attack. Help her. Jamal did not move a single muscle. The chief of neurosurgery stood perfectly still, his tall frame casting a long, dark shadow over Beatrice's trembling body. His face was carved from absolute ice, a mask of pure clinical detachment that was far more terrifying than any weapon. He simply stared down at his mother-in-law, watching the color drain from her face, watching the undeniable reality of human mortality finally catch up to the untouchable Beatrice Blackwell. Even in the face of imminent death, Beatrice's toxic, blinding entitlement refused to be extinguished. She wheezed violently, her eyes bulging as she looked up at Jamal. Spittle gathered at the corner of her pale lips. Call the elite cardiac team!" Beatrice gasped, her voice a wet, rattling demand. She wasn't pleading. She was issuing a command. Her hand reached out, grabbing the hem of Jamal's tailored trousers with a desperate clawing grip. "Get the chief of cardiology down here immediately. VIP protocol. Do it now." Jamal slowly looked down at her clutching hand, his expression utterly unreadable. Beatrice coughed a terrible wet sound, but her venomous gaze shifted past Jamal and locked onto me where I stood silently watching the collapse of their dynasty. The hatred in her eyes was a physical force, a dying animal trying to inflict one last lethal bite. "And fire her!" Beatrice wheezed, her chest heaving violently. She pointed a shaking, crooked finger at my face. "Fire Maddie. She destroyed this family. She ruined Spencer. Use your authority on the board. Fire that lying, vindictive bitch right now, Jamal. Promise me you will destroy her." The absolute absurdity of the demand hung heavily in the sterile air. Beatrice Blackwell was currently suffocating on the floor of a hospital, her heart actively failing her son, being dragged into a federal transport vehicle in handcuffs, and her absolute highest priority was demanding that her son-in-law fire the undercover federal informant who had exposed their crimes. Jamal reached down and calmly, methodically peeled Beatrice's desperate fingers off his trousers. He stood perfectly straight, towering over her, radiating a terrifying, absolute authority. "You have a lot of nerve barking orders from the floor, Beatrice," Jamal stated, his voice ringing with a cold, lethal precision that commanded the entire room. "You are actively experiencing an acute myocardial infarction. The left anterior descending artery is likely completely blocked. Every second that ticks by is causing irreversible necrosis to your heart muscle. You are dying, Beatrice, and yet your final thoughts are consumed by your own bottomless racist arrogance." Beatrice choked, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated panic as Jamal's clinical assessment of her impending death washed over her. She tried to speak, but only a gurgling gasp escaped her throat. "For 8 years, Jamal continued, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register that vibrated against the glass walls. "For 8 long, excruciating years, I have smiled politely while you sat across from me at country club dinners and made your thinly veiled, disgusting comments. I listened as you loudly complained about affirmative action. I stayed perfectly silent when you introduced me to your wealthy, aristocratic friends as the hospital's diversity hire, deliberately undermining my medical degrees, my surgical record, and my position as chief of surgery." Caroline looked up at her husband, tears streaming down her face, her jaw trembling as the ugly, suppressed truth of her family's bigotry was finally dragged into the harsh, unforgiving light. Jamal did not look at his wife. His dark, furious eyes remained locked entirely on the gasping, terrified woman on the floor. "You treated me like a stray dog that Caroline dragged into your pristine white mansion." Jamal delivered each word like a surgical strike. "You constantly whispered behind my back that I was a leech. You told your friends I only married your daughter to elevate my own social standing, that I was desperate to attach myself to the great, powerful Blackwell name to escape my own background. You viewed me as a classless opportunist feeding off your generational wealth." Beatrice was turning a sickly shade of bluish-gray. Her hands clutched her chest tighter, her body curling inward as the agonizing pressure in her chest multiplied. She let out a pathetic whimpering moan, a sound completely stripped of her former pride. "But that is the grand, pathetic irony of your entire miserable existence, Beatrice," Jamal said, leaning slightly forward, his voice a razor-sharp whisper that sliced through the room. "The great Blackwell fortune was nothing but a fragile house of cards propped up by Spencer's massive federal fraud. And when those cards started to fall 3 years ago, when the IRS issued those crippling secret tax liens against the family estate, Spencer didn't save you." Beatrice's eyes snapped wide open, shock momentarily overriding her physical agony. "That's right," Jamal confirmed, his face a mask of cold, triumphant vindication. "I know all about the mounting tax liens. I know that your pristine family estate was 2 weeks away from being seized by the federal government because your precious golden boy had gambled away the property taxes to cover his failing supply chain margins. You were about to be thrown out onto the street, humiliated in front of all those country club friends you care so much about." Caroline gasped loudly, scrambling backward on the floor, her hands flying to her face in total shock. Jamal, what are you talking about? What tax liens? Ask your mother. Jamal replied, his gaze never leaving Beatrice. Ask her who quietly wired $3.2 million to the Internal Revenue Service to clear the debt and save the Blackwell estate. It wasn't Spencer. It wasn't the family trust. Jamal reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his sleek smartphone. He held it in his hand, a lifeline that Beatrice desperately needed, but he made absolutely no move to dial for help. It was me, Beatrice. Jamal delivered the final crushing blow. The diversity hire, the classless leech. I took $3 million of my own surgically earned money and quietly paid off your massive, humiliating debts to protect Caroline from the fallout of your son's criminal incompetence. I have been secretly funding your lavish, aristocratic lifestyle for the last 36 months. You don't own that estate anymore, you owe me. The absolute devastation of the truth finally broke the last remaining shreds of Beatrice's sanity. The woman who had built her entire identity on racial superiority, generational wealth, and social dominance had just been informed that she was a complete financial dependent to the very man she had actively despised and belittled for nearly a decade. She was a charity case kept afloat only by the grace of the son-in-law she deemed entirely beneath her. Beatrice let out a long, shuddering wheeze, her eyes rolling wildly in her head. The shock of the financial revelation combined with the catastrophic failure of her heart pushed her entirely over the edge. Her body went completely rigid on the marble floor, her jaw locking as the cardiac event reached its critical lethal peak. Jamal stared down at her for 3 more agonizing seconds, letting her fully absorb the reality of her complete and total defeat. Then, with smooth, effortless precision, he finally unlocked his phone and tapped the emergency hospital speed dial, bringing the confrontation to its brutal, inevitable climax. Code Blue Executive Conference Room 3, Jamal stated into his phone, his voice a flat, mechanical drone that completely lacked any personal panic. Suspected acute myocardial infarction. Bring the crash cart immediately. He ended the call and slipped the device back into his tailored pocket. He did not kneel beside Beatrice. He did not offer a comforting hand or whisper soothing words of reassurance to the gasping woman on the floor. He simply stood like a towering sentinel, honoring the strict, unyielding boundaries of his Hippocratic oath without sacrificing another ounce of his personal dignity to the Blackwell family. Within seconds, the heavy glass doors burst open. A rapid response team flooded the sterile space, their scrubs a blur of urgent motion as they swarmed the writhing matriarch. Defibrillator pads were aggressively slapped onto her bare chest. Intravenous lines were expertly plunged into her trembling pale veins. Portable monitors shrieked to life, filling the small conference room with the frantic, erratic, terrifying rhythm of Beatrice's failing heart. Jamal supervised the chaos from a calculated clinical distance. Administer 300 milligrams of amiodarone and prep the surgical bay for immediate catheterization, he instructed the lead attending physician. The medical team moved with practiced military precision, stabilizing Beatrice just enough to heave her heavy, sweating body onto a portable transport stretcher. As the paramedics secured the thick nylon straps tightly across her chest, Beatrice's eyelids fluttered open. She looked up at Jamal, her eyes wide with a desperate, pleading vulnerability, clearly expecting the familiar, obedient son-in-law to follow her stretcher to the intensive care unit. Instead, Jamal took a single definitive step backward. I have fulfilled my legal and ethical medical obligation to preserve your life, Jamal announced, his words falling like heavy, crushing stones onto the stretcher. But I am officially withdrawing my specialized care. Effective this exact second, I formally resign as the private family physician for the Blackwell estate. I will no longer review your charts. I will not authorize your premium prescriptions. You are now a standard general admission patient, in a hospital you no longer hold any influence over. The sheer brutal finality of his statement shattered whatever fragile delusional composure Caroline had left. She had just watched her brother hauled away by federal agents and her mother nearly die on the marble floor. Now the man she had treated as a convenient high-status accessory was permanently severing her final lifeline. Caroline let out a furious, animalistic shriek. She lunged violently forward, raising her hand high, and slapped Jamal across the face with every single ounce of physical strength she possessed. The sharp, explosive crack of her palm striking his cheek echoed loudly over the steady beeping of the medical monitors. "You traitor!" Caroline screamed, her face contorted in an ugly, vicious mask of pure rage. Spittle flew from her lips as she jabbed her finger at his chest. "You ungrateful, backstabbing traitor! My family gave you everything. We elevated you. We brought you into high society. You are nothing without the Blackwell name." Jamal did not flinch. His head barely moved from the impact of her strike. A faint, angry red mark slowly bloomed across his strong jawline, but his dark eyes remained completely dead, devoid of any warmth or affection. He stared at his hysterical wife with absolute chilling apathy. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, Jamal raised his left hand. His gaze dropped to the thick gold band resting heavily on his ring finger. With a smooth, deliberate, unhesitating motion, he gripped the metal and slid it off. He reached out and dropped the wedding ring directly onto the sleek glass conference table. The heavy metallic clink sounded exactly like a judge's gavel striking a sound block signaling the definitive end of a trial. "I signed the divorce papers this morning," Jamal stated, his voice devoid of any sorrow. "My legal counsel has already filed them with the county clerk. And since your brother completely bankrupted your precious family trust, and I used my own personal capital to pay off the estate's massive tax liens, the title to the primary mansion is solely in my name." Caroline stopped screaming. The blood rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. "The deed to the summer house is in my name," Jamal continued, stepping closer, forcing her to look up at him. "The registrations for the 3 sports cars you drive are in my name. The entire foundation of your luxurious lifestyle belongs exclusively to me." Caroline stumbled backward, her designer heels slipping on the polished floor. The breath was knocked completely out of her lungs. "You have exactly 24 hours to get your designer clothes, your expensive shoes, and your jewelry off my property." Jamal delivered the final devastating blow with surgical precision. "When the clock strikes noon tomorrow, the private security gates will be permanently locked. If you or any member of your disgraced family attempt to enter, I will have you immediately arrested for criminal trespassing." Caroline crumpled against the glass wall, sliding down to the floor in a heap of total agonizing defeat. Her luxurious, sheltered, arrogant life had just been violently incinerated in a matter of minutes. Jamal turned his back on his soon-to-be ex-wife. He walked directly over to where I was standing near the doorway. He extended his large, steady hand. I reached out and shook it firmly, feeling the profound mutual respect passing between us. "Thank you, Maddie," Jamal said, a genuine note of profound relief finally warming his voice. "Thank you for finding that offshore data. Thank you for executing this trap and helping me see the absolute truth about the people I married into. You gave me my life back." "You earned your freedom, Jamal," I replied, holding his gaze. "Enjoy every second of it." Alexander Reed stepped forward, buttoning his suit jacket. The Vanguard health chairman had seen entirely enough of the Blackwell's toxic criminal melodrama. He signaled to the burly hospital security guards who had arrived directly behind the rapid response medical team. "Get this entire family out of my premium wing," Reed commanded, his voice brokering absolutely zero argument. "Downgrade the mother to a standard public ward on the lower levels and escort the daughter off the premises immediately. They are no longer VIPs. They are a massive liability." The security guards moved in aggressively, flanking the weeping Caroline to forcibly remove her from the suite. The paramedics unlocked the wheels of Beatrice's stretcher, preparing to roll the disgraced, utterly humiliated matriarch out into the chaotic, unglamorous public corridors of the hospital. Suddenly, Beatrice let out a feral, rattling gasp. She pushed herself up against the nylon medical restraints with a final desperate surge of manic survival energy. She plunged her trembling hand deep into her discarded designer bag resting at the foot of the stretcher. With a crazed, wild look in her sunken eyes, Beatrice ripped a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper from the expensive leather interior, holding it up into the air like a weapon. Beatrice clutched the crumpled, yellowed piece of paper like a holy relic, refusing to let go, even as the paramedics expertly stabilized her condition. Her breathing was still shallow, but the immediate threat of death had passed, leaving behind only her raw, venomous determination. The hospital staff swiftly and efficiently transferred her from the luxurious premium stretcher into a rigid standard medical transport wheelchair. The squeak of the rubber wheels against the polished tile marked her immediate demotion. The paramedics pushed the wheelchair out of the opulent, quiet corridors of the VIP wing and thrust her directly into the chaotic, echoing expanse of the hospital's main public lobby. Alexander Reed Jamal and I followed closely behind, stepping into the massive atrium. The harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights washed over the crowded waiting areas, illuminating hundreds of exhausted patients, crying children, and overwhelmed families. It was the exact environment Beatrice despised, a space entirely devoid of privilege. Beatrice slapped the paramedic's hand away, forcing the wheelchair to an abrupt halt right in the center of the bustling lobby. She straightened her ruined floral blazer, took a deep rattling breath, and thrust the yellow document high into the air. "You think you can throw me out into the street like common trash?" Beatrice shrieked, her voice slicing through the ambient noise of the lobby like a siren. "You think you can dump me in a filthy public ward and leave me to rot? You think your little federal operation stripped me of my protections? But you are completely wrong, Maddie. You are legally fully bound to pay for every single premium treatment I demand." I stepped forward, narrowing my eyes at the document waving furiously in her manicured grip. As the harsh lobby lighting hit the paper, I recognized the thick, textured legal stationery. I recognized the bold black heading at the top of the page. Most importantly, I recognized the distinctive slash of my own signature in blue ink sitting right next to a bright red notary stamp. A cold, sickening wave of realization crashed over me. It was a comprehensive medical proxy, an unconditional financial guarantor agreement. The memory from exactly 2 years ago slammed into my mind with brutal, unforgiving clarity. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. Spencer had marched into our kitchen carrying a massive 2-inch thick stack of dense legal documents. He had smiled his charming, devastatingly fake smile, claiming they were just routine life insurance policy updates mandated by his corporate board of directors. He insisted they needed to be signed and filed by morning. He had stood directly over my shoulder at the kitchen island, pouring me a glass of wine and quickly flipping through the endless pages, pointing impatiently to the signature lines. Beatrice had been sitting right there at the kitchen table, casually sipping tea and chatting happily about a country club fundraiser. She had actively distracted me, keeping my attention entirely off the dense legal jargon. They had worked together flawlessly. They had buried this catastrophic financial trap deep within 50 pages of innocuous insurance paperwork. Spencer and Beatrice had intentionally, maliciously tricked me into signing a legally binding contract that named me as the sole financial guarantor for Beatrice's medical emergencies. They had plotted to ensure that if her health ever failed, my personal accounts would be drained to cover her exorbitant medical expenses, completely shielding their own wealth from the hospital billing department. "You tricked me?" I stated, my voice echoing with pure, unfiltered disgust as I stared down at the scheming woman in the wheelchair. "You buried that guarantor form under a mountain of fake life insurance updates. You planned this from the very beginning to use me as your personal bank account." Beatrice did not care about the truth. She only cared about leverage, and she had an entire lobby full of unsuspecting strangers to use to her advantage. She spun her wheelchair around to face the crowded waiting areas. She gripped the armrest, threw her head back, and let out a loud theatrical wail that instantly silenced the entire atrium. Every single head in the lobby turned toward the center of the room. "Help me!" Beatrice cried out, projecting her voice with the skill of a seasoned stage actress. She pointed her trembling, violently shaking finger directly at me, making sure every stranger in the room knew exactly who the villain was. "Look at this horrible woman. Look at my rich, heartless daughter-in-law. I am a dying old woman. My heart is failing. I just suffered a massive cardiac event, and she is abandoning me right here on the floor." The murmurs rippled through the lobby instantly. Exhausted families and waiting patients shifted in their plastic chairs, their eyes darting between my tailored suit and Beatrice's pathetic slumped posture in the transport wheelchair. She works for the federal government. She has millions of dollars sitting in her private accounts. Beatrice wailed loudly, spinning her flawless, venomous lies to the captive audience. She clutched her chest, panting heavily for dramatic effect. And yet she is forcing the hospital administrators to throw me out of my room. She is intentionally leaving a sick, defenseless widow to foot a massive, crippling emergency room bill. She signed the papers to protect me, and now she is trying to financially ruin a dying woman just out of pure spite. Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut, forcing actual tears to spill over her cheeks as she sobbed into her hands. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She was actively creating a massive, humiliating public scene, banking on the fact that I would be too embarrassed by the social pressure to fight back. She genuinely believed that the sheer weight of public shame would force me to quietly accept the financial burden just to make the screaming stop. She expected me to bow my head, take the fraudulent document, and pay for her luxurious medical care to save face in front of 100 strangers. The judgmental whispers of the crowd swelled into a loud, unified hum of absolute disapproval. Dozens of camera phones suddenly snapped upward, their glass lenses focused directly on me as eager strangers recorded the weeping wealthy widow and her supposedly monstrous daughter-in-law. A woman sitting in the front row of the plastic waiting area actually gasped out loud, clutching her canvas purse tightly to her chest while glaring at me with raw, unfiltered disgust. Beatrice soaked up their unearned pity like a dying weed absorbing rainwater. Her theatrical, gasping sobs grew significantly louder, her thin shoulders shaking violently beneath her ruined, sweat-stained floral blazer. She thrust the yellowed medical proxy toward my face, once again her tear-streaked cheeks twisting into a hideous secret mask of triumphant malice. She genuinely thought she had me trapped in a flawless, inescapable public checkmate. I did not break eye contact. I did not shrink away from the glaring lenses of the mobile phones recording my every move. I simply stood my ground in the exact center of the sterile, brightly lit hospital atrium, projecting the absolute, unshakable calm of a federal agent who held every single winning card. I looked down at the crumpled, fraudulent document trembling in her manicured grip. Then I looked at the outraged faces of the spectators surrounding us. "You really believe a crowd of strangers will force me to fund your corruption, Beatrice?" I stated, my voice projecting clearly over the angry murmurs, crisp and completely devoid of any intimidation. "You think a piece of paper signed 2 years ago under fraudulent pretenses is your golden ticket to a luxury recovery. But you are forgetting one crucial, undeniable fact about your precious son." I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the glass screen with deliberate precision, navigating quickly to my highly secured federal contact list. "Spencer is fundamentally selfish," I announced to the silent watching lobby. "He has no loyalty to anyone but himself, not to me, not to his defrauded investors, and most certainly not to you." I hit dial, activated the speakerphone setting, and held the device up high for maximum volume. The secure line rang exactly twice before a deep, booming, authoritative voice echoed through the massive, cavernous atrium. "National Insurance Directorate Director Sterling speaking. Agent Maddie, what can I do for you this morning?" "Director Sterling," I said, my tone strictly professional and commanding. "I need immediate public verbal confirmation regarding the premium VIP medical policy under the Blackwell Family Trust. Specifically, I need the current legal status of the financial guarantor proxy document assigned to Beatrice Blackwell." The sharp sound of rapid keyboard typing filtered through the speaker, amplified perfectly in the echoing hospital lobby. The spectators held their collective breath, their phones still recording every single second of the confrontation. Beatrice stopped sobbing instantly. Her hands froze in mid-air, a sudden terrifying flicker of genuine uncertainty crossing her pale, sweat-slicked face. "I have the master file pulled up right here, Agent," Director Sterling's voice boomed from the device. "The medical proxy document you are referencing is entirely void. It holds absolutely zero legal or financial weight. Beatrice gasped sharply, her jaw dropping wide open. That is a lie, she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at my phone. I have the physical document right here in my hand. It is signed and properly notarized. The physical document is completely irrelevant, ma'am. Director Sterling countered, his professional tone slicing through her rising hysteria like a surgical scalpel. The premium VIP medical coverage associated with that specific proxy was illegally terminated exactly 6 months ago. Spencer Blackwell personally accessed the primary trust accounts and completely canceled your safety net. Beatrice gripped the black plastic armrests of her transport wheelchair, her knuckles turning stark white with the force of her grip. Why would he do that? Why would my own son cancel my medical coverage? I looked directly into Beatrice's sunken, terrified eyes. I let the absolute suffocating silence of the room stretch for one heavy, punishing second before allowing the director to deliver the final killing blow. Spencer Blackwell canceled your premium health coverage to free up the liquid capital required to purchase a secondary ultra-exclusive VIP policy, Director Sterling announced loudly. He transferred your entire medical fund, including the guarantor proxy, to a completely new beneficiary. The premium policy is currently held exclusively by a Ms. Brittany Hayes. Brittany, the mistress, the young opportunistic woman who was currently hiding in the hospital parking garage. The reaction was instantaneous and utterly devastating. The large crowd of strangers who just moments ago had been ready to lynch me let out a collective booming gasp of pure, unadulterated shock. The pity they had felt for the crying widow evaporated into thin air, instantly replaced by a potent mixture of appalled amusement and morbid fascination. Whispers of his mistress and her own son rippled through the expansive lobby like wildfire. Beatrice sat completely paralyzed in her rigid wheelchair. The realization hit her with the destructive force of a nuclear bomb. Her precious golden boy, the son she had fiercely protected, actively enabled and conspired with to ruin my life, had explicitly sold her out. Spencer had looked at his mother's expensive life-saving medical coverage and decided to rip it away, just to spoil his young affair partner. He had left his own mother completely exposed and entirely financially vulnerable, so his mistress could enjoy premium top-tier health benefits. The yellowed, fraudulent piece of paper slipped from Beatrice's trembling fingers. It fluttered uselessly through the air and landed face down on the cold floor tiles. Her mouth moved rapidly, but absolutely no sound came out. The invincible, arrogant matriarch of the Blackwell Empire was finally permanently broken. She had been viciously betrayed by the only person she truly loved. She was completely alone, publicly humiliated and entirely destitute. The heavy, suffocating silence in the lobby was absolute. No one moved a single muscle. No one spoke a single word. The spectators simply stared in awe at the ruined woman slumped deeply in the cheap transport chair. Then a sharp, piercing electronic ringtone shattered the quiet. The loud sound came from the depths of Beatrice's discarded designer handbag resting near her feet. She did not reach for it. She simply stared straight ahead, her eyes glassy, vacant, and completely devoid of life. The phone rang again, louder and significantly more insistent this time. Alexander Reed, standing just a few feet away, reached down and unzipped the expensive bag. He pulled out the vibrating smartphone. The screen was flashing bright red, displaying a critical automated banking alert. Reed swiped the screen to answer and hit the speaker button, holding it out toward Beatrice. This is an urgent automated notification from Vanguard Federal Bank, a robotic synthesized female voice announced, echoing loudly through the perfectly silent atrium. Please be advised that all authorized grace periods have officially expired. Effective immediately, the Blackwell family estate has been formally placed into foreclosure. Federal agents are currently on site to execute the complete seizure of the property and all remaining physical assets. You must vacate the premises immediately. The synthesized female voice clicked off, leaving a ringing void in the massive hospital atrium. Alexander Reed casually dropped the burner phone back into Beatrice's lap. The matriarch remained entirely catatonic, staring blankly at the floor. I turned on my heel, the sharp clack of my stilettos cutting through the stunned silence of the spectators. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a wide, clear path leading directly to the main exit. I did not look back. My federal assignment was complete. The Blackwell Syndicate was dismantled, their assets seized and their aristocratic armor permanently shattered. Before I could reach the revolving glass doors, frantic footsteps slapped heavily against the polished marble floor behind me. A hand clamped down hard on my forearm, the fingernails digging desperately into my tailored jacket. I stopped and turned. Caroline stood there. Her transformation was absolute. The arrogant, untouchable heiress who had sneered at me for years was completely gone. Her expensive mascara ran in thick black rivers down her pale cheeks. Her designer dress was wrinkled and sweat-stained. Her entire body shook with violent, unrestrained panic. She had no brother to protect her, no mother to fund her, and no husband to house her. She was facing the terrifying reality of absolute zero. "Maddie, wait!" Caroline sobbed, her grip tightening on my sleeve. She dropped every single ounce of her precious pride right there in the middle of the public lobby, surrounded by the same strangers who had just witnessed her mother's ruin. "Please, you have to help me." I stared down at her hand until she slowly, reluctantly released her grip. I remained perfectly silent, letting her desperation suffocate her. "Jamal froze my credit cards." Caroline wept, her chest heaving as the tears spilled freely. "He locked me out of the banking app. The estate is gone. The feds are taking everything. I have absolutely nowhere to go. I do not have a single dollar to my name. Please, Maddie, just give me some cash, just enough to book a decent hotel room for a few nights until I can figure this out. You have federal resources. You have money. Just give me something." It was a pathetic, groveling display. "I am the real victim here," Caroline wailed, her voice echoing shrilly across the atrium as she frantically threw her own flesh and blood directly under the bus. "Spencer ruined everything with his stupid offshore accounts. My mother dragged us all down with her insane greed. Jamal betrayed me out of nowhere. I did not know anything about the tax liens or the federal fraud. I swear to you, I was lied to. They destroyed my entire life, Maddie. You have to understand that I am completely innocent in all of this." I let her finish her weeping monologue. I let her play the ultimate victim. Then I stepped into her personal space, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. "You are not a victim, Caroline." I stated, my voice a quiet, lethal blade that stopped her tears instantly. "You are an active, willing participant in my destruction. And you are a terrible liar." Caroline gulped, her eyes darting nervously toward the watching crowd. "I do not know what you mean." "Let us rewind exactly 12 months, I said, leaning in closer. Spencer was aggressively preparing to file the divorce papers. He needed a bulletproof reason to legally drain our joint assets and leave me with absolutely nothing. But I had a flawless record. I was a supportive wife. I had an immaculate credit history. He had zero leverage, so he turned to you for help. Caroline shook her head frantically, stepping backward. "No, I never did anything to you. You used your spare key to let yourself into our house while I was at a marketing conference in Chicago." I revealed, watching the last remnants of color drain completely from her face. "You walked straight into my master bedroom. You crawled under my nightstand and you physically planted a miniature voice-activated recording device directly beneath the floorboard." Caroline opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The absolute shock of my knowledge paralyzed her. "I found it, Caroline." I continued, pressing my advantage with ruthless precision. "I found the digital transmitter exactly 3 days later. But as an undercover federal agent, I am trained never to disrupt an active surveillance trap. I left it right there. I let you record me. I watched the encrypted data packets transfer directly to your personal IP address." She shrank away from me, terrified by the sheer magnitude of her exposure. "You spent weeks secretly logging my private conversations." I laid out the exact blueprint of her betrayal, ensuring every word landed with maximum impact. "You listened to my phone calls. You listened to my private moments. Then you sat in your luxurious mansion, opened your audio editing software, and maliciously sliced those recordings apart. You spliced together isolated words and fragmented sentences to create entirely fabricated conversations. Caroline began to tremble violently. She knew exactly what she had done, and she knew I had the federal evidence to prove it. You manufactured fake audio clips of me screaming, making violent threats, and sounding completely mentally unhinged. I stated, my voice echoing with righteous authority. You handed those edited files directly to Spencer. You provided him with the fraudulent evidence he needed to secure an emergency restraining order. You gave him the legal ammunition to lock me out of my own home, freeze my bank accounts, and throw me onto the street with only the clothes on my back. You actively conspired to destroy my life just to protect your brother's stolen fortune. I had to do it, Caroline suddenly screamed, abandoning her victim narrative as her true ugly nature flared to the surface. You were going to figure out about the offshore accounts. You were asking too many questions about the company finances. Spencer needed you gone before you ruined everything. We were protecting the family. And look exactly where that protection got you. I replied smoothly, gesturing to the harsh reality surrounding her. Your brother is going to federal prison for a very long time. Your mother is bankrupt and facing a massive medical debt she cannot pay. Your husband has legally severed every single tie to your name. You bet your entire future on a criminal enterprise and you lost everything. Please. Caroline reverted instantly to begging, her hands clasping together in a desperate plea. I am sorry. I will apologize. I will do whatever you want. Just give me $500. Just enough for a room. I cannot sleep on the street. I am a Blackwell. You are nothing. I corrected her, delivering the final verdict with absolute crystalline clarity. The Blackwell name is currently being seized by the federal government. Your accounts are zeroed out. Your social standing is entirely eradicated. I will not give you a single dime. I turned my back on her for the final time. The automatic glass doors slid open with a soft mechanical hum. I stepped out into the bright, warm afternoon sunlight, taking a deep breath of fresh, uncontaminated air. Behind me, inside the sterile hospital lobby, Caroline collapsed onto her hands and knees. She wailed loudly, her sobs echoing against the glass walls as the harsh reality of her new destitute existence finally crushed her. She was entirely alone, completely broke, and utterly defeated. The empire was dead, and I had survived the fire. As I stood on the threshold of the hospital entrance, the notoriously volatile Chicago weather shifted with violent, terrifying suddenness. Massive, bruising black clouds rolled in rapidly off Lake Michigan, instantly swallowing the brief pocket of afternoon sunlight. A harsh, biting wind whipped across the pavement, dropping the temperature by 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. The sky cracked open with a deafening roar, unleashing a torrential, freezing downpour. It was a fitting, apocalyptic backdrop for the absolute ruin taking place behind me. I had taken barely 3 steps into the covered portico when the automatic glass doors slid rapidly open again. Caroline scrambled out of the lobby, completely ignoring the sharp, freezing wind. She literally threw herself forward, falling hard onto her bare knees on the cold concrete just inside the overhang. She was heedless of the dirt staining her ruined designer dress. She clawed frantically at the hem of my tailored coat, looking up at me with wide, tear-soaked eyes. "Maddie, wait, please," Caroline begged, her voice taking on a sickeningly sweet, nostalgic tone that completely contradicted her earlier venomous rage. "We were sisters. We were family. Think about all those weekends we spent together, the shopping trips downtown, the holidays at the estate. I loved you like a real sister, Maddie. Deep down, you know that is the truth. You cannot just leave your own sister to freeze on the streets." She weaponized our past with shameless, desperate precision. She actively tried to invoke memories of a sisterhood that had only ever been a convenient, superficial illusion designed to mask her constant jealousy and underlying cruelty. She sobbed loudly, clasping her hands together tightly, in a posture of total surrender. "Just one single check, Maddie," Caroline pleaded, her teeth audibly chattering as the freezing wind whipped around the concrete pillars. "Just a small cash loan to get me through the week. You are a good person. You are kind and forgiving. You always were the better person. Please do not let me freeze out here. I have absolutely nothing left." I looked down at the trembling, pathetic woman clutching my coat. Slowly, deliberately, I let a warm, forgiving smile spread across my face. I softened my eyes, adopting the exact expression of the naive, accommodating sister-in-law she had ruthlessly exploited for years. "You are right, Caroline," I said softly, my voice dripping with manufactured sympathy and warmth. "We were family, and no matter what happened between us today, leaving you out here with absolutely zero resources would be incredibly cruel." Caroline let out a massive, shuddering gasp of pure relief. Her tears of sheer panic instantly transformed into tears of greedy, arrogant salvation. She practically vibrated with anticipation as I reached into my tailored suit pocket and pulled out a slim, leather-bound financial portfolio. She wiped her nose rapidly with the back of her hand, her eyes locked hungrily onto the leather case. She genuinely believed she had manipulated her way out of total destruction. I unclipped a sleek silver pen from the spine of the portfolio. I took my time smoothly flipping the cover open. I uncapped the pen and began to write the sharp scratching of the nib against the thick paper barely audible over the roaring storm outside. Caroline watched my hand intently, her eyes wide, already calculating exactly how many nights at a luxury downtown hotel my signature would buy her. "Thank you, Maddie." Caroline wept, reaching her hands out like a desperate beggar awaiting a royal pardon. "I will pay you back every cent, I promise. I will get a job. I will change my life." "I know you will," I replied brightly. I finished writing, capped the pen securely, and tore the crisp slip of paper from the binding. With a graceful, fluid motion, I extended the slip toward her. Caroline snatched it from my fingers with lightning speed. Her eyes darted aggressively down to the paper, eager to see the massive sum I had gifted her. The greedy, triumphant smile instantly vanished from her face. It melted away completely, replaced by an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. It was not a check. It was a highly detailed, itemized forensic audit invoice. $50,000. I stated, my warm smile snapping instantly into a mask of pure lethal ice. "That is the exact precise amount of money you actively embezzled from Alexander Reed's pediatric hospital charity over the past 18 months. You did not think the federal government would seize the charity ledgers when we raided Spencer's offshore accounts, did you?" Caroline stared at the invoice, her jaw hanging slack, as her eyes scanned the meticulously detailed charges, unable to comprehend the trap she had just walked into. "I know exactly how you funded your lavish spa weekends and your exclusive designer handbag collection." I continued, pressing the absolute, undeniable reality of her crimes onto her shoulders. "You set up dummy vendor accounts and funneled the pediatric charity donations directly into your personal offshore trust. Every single fraudulent wire transfer is fully documented in the federal evidence files. If you want to review the exact federal case logs, you can refer to the digital exhibits named audit_sum_21.docx, along with fin_rec_21.docx, trans_log_21.docx, and finally the comprehensive master ledger listed officially as master_ledger_21.docs. The FBI has tracked every single keystroke you ever made." Caroline began to hyperventilate. The heavy paper shook violently in her hands. The realization that she was not just broke, but actively facing imminent federal embezzlement charges shattered her completely. "That invoice is merely a courtesy copy," I said, leaning down until my face was mere inches from hers. "The actual bill has already been submitted to the Internal Revenue Service and the regional federal prosecutor. You do not need a luxury hotel room, Caroline. You need a very aggressive defense attorney. And since your assets are permanently frozen, I suggest you start researching a public defender immediately." Alexander Reed stepped out of the hospital lobby, flanked closely by 4 massive, heavily armed hospital security guards. The chairman looked down at Caroline with a mixture of absolute disgust and fierce vindication. The charity she had mercilessly robbed was his personal passion project. "Take out the trash," Alexander commanded the guards, pointing firmly toward the exit. The armed guards surged forward with zero hesitation. 2 of them grabbed Caroline aggressively by her upper arms, hauling her violently off the concrete floor. She shrieked, kicking her bare legs and thrashing wildly, but their grips were like iron vices. At the exact same time, the other two guards wheeled a catatonic, thoroughly humiliated Beatrice out from the lobby. The matriarch remained entirely unresponsive, clutching the sides of her cheap transport wheelchair as the guards pushed her forcefully toward the exit. The automatic sliding glass doors parted wide. The freezing torrential downpour roared like a freight train, sheets of icy rain pounding the pavement just inches away from the overhang. With one synchronized, forceful motion, the security guards physically shoved Caroline and Beatrice's wheelchair directly out into the storm. Caroline stumbled and crashed hard onto the soaking wet pavement, scraping her hands. Beatrice's wheelchair jolted violently over the curb, sliding precariously on the slick asphalt as the freezing rain instantly drenched them both to the bone. The icy downpour plastered Caroline's ruined hair to her face, washing away the very last remaining traces of the arrogant Blackwell dynasty. They were locked out, utterly ruined, and completely abandoned to the merciless freezing wrath of the Chicago storm. I stood just inside the warm, dry comfort of the hospital lobby, watching the torrential rain mercilessly batter the two remaining figures of the Blackwell dynasty. The thick, reinforced glass separated my calm reality from their chaotic destruction. Caroline was still on her hands and knees in the freezing puddles, while Beatrice slumped in her soaked wheelchair, completely numb to the storm raging around her. The ambient heat of the atrium wrapped around me, a stark contrast to the icy downpour, washing away the last remnants of their unearned privilege. I felt a profound sense of closure. The operation was a resounding success, and my personal demons were finally exorcised. Suddenly, a weak, trembling tug on the sleeve of my tailored jacket broke my focus. I turned sharply, my federal instincts kicking in, ready to confront another enraged member of Spencer's fallen syndicate. Instead, I found myself staring down at Brittany. The young, opportunistic mistress who had proudly flaunted her stolen wealth, paraded around in my stolen jewelry, and mocked my supposedly failing marriage, was entirely unrecognizable. Brittany was not wearing her usual designer couture or her smug, triumphant smile. She was leaning heavily against a marble structural pillar, her face a sickening shade of gray. Her blonde hair clung to her forehead in damp, sweaty clumps. She was clutching her heavily swollen belly with both arms, her breath coming in short, rapid, panicked gasps. Her designer maternity dress was disheveled, and she was physically shaking her knees, buckling slightly with every shallow breath. "Maddie!" Brittany gasped, her voice completely stripped of its usual venomous arrogance. It was a pathetic, broken wheeze. "Please, I do not have anyone else to ask." I stared at her, my expression hardening into a mask of pure, impenetrable ice. "You must have lost your mind approaching me. Where is your generous provider? Where is Spencer to lavish you with the premium VIP care he literally stole from his own mother to give to you?" Brittany let out a sharp, agonizing moan, doubling over slightly as another massive contraction hit her. She gripped the marble pillar tighter, her knuckles turning stark white. "He left," Brittany sobbed, tears mingling with the heavy sweat on her face. "When the federal agents breached the executive suites upstairs, Spencer bolted. He took the emergency stairwell to the parking garage. He left me alone in the VIP maternity ward. He did not even look back, Maddie. He just ran to save himself." I felt a cold wave of validation. Spencer's cowardice was incredibly predictable. "And the premium medical policy?" I asked, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. "Frozen." Brittany wept, her chest heaving. "The hospital administrators came into my private suite 10 minutes ago. They told me the federal government had flagged every single account tied to Spencer. My credit cards are declining. My bank accounts are locked. The administrators kicked me out of the VIP wing. They told me I had to transfer to the chaotic public ward or leave the premises entirely." She reached out, her trembling hand hovering just inches from my jacket, too afraid to actually touch me again. "I cannot stay here, Maddie," Brittany pleaded, her eyes darting frantically around the lobby as if expecting federal agents to descend upon her at any moment. "The press is already gathering outside the main gates. The investigators are ripping apart the executive suites. I need to get to St. Jude's Clinic across town. They have a standard public intake and nobody knows me there. But I have absolutely zero cash. My digital wallet is blocked. The rideshare apps are suspended because the payment methods are tied to Spencer's seized accounts. She paused, gasping sharply, her eyes squeezing shut in absolute agony as a fresh, powerful contraction seized her body. Please, she begged, her voice dropping to a pathetic, humiliating whisper. Just give me $40, just enough for a basic taxi fare across town. I am in active labor. The contractions are 5 minutes apart. I am terrified and I am completely broke. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the woman who had actively conspired to ruin my life. A fierce, powerful internal conflict raged within my mind. Part of me, the deeply wounded, betrayed wife, wanted to laugh. I wanted to point to the sliding glass doors and tell her to go join Caroline and Beatrice in the freezing rain. This woman had slept in my bed. She had worn my clothes. She had knowingly and gleefully participated in Spencer's cruel psychological warfare against me. Walking away and leaving her to suffer the humiliating consequences of her own terrible choices would be the ultimate satisfying revenge. But as I stared at her terrified, sweat-drenched face, my gaze dropped to her swollen stomach. Inside that belly was an entirely innocent life. That unborn child did not choose Spencer Blackwell as a father. That baby did not ask to be brought into a world of corporate fraud, malicious betrayal, and federal indictments. The child was blameless, completely separate from the toxic criminal actions of its parents. My federal training and my own moral compass demanded a higher standard. I am an agent of justice, not an agent of mindless cruelty. Allowing an innocent infant to suffer medical complications in a hospital lobby out of pure personal spite would make me no better than Beatrice or Spencer. I pulled out my secure federal tablet, my fingers moving rapidly across the encrypted screen to verify her claims. I immediately accessed the central asset seizure logs. I opened the specific document named offshore_trace_22.docx, confirming the total freeze on Brittany's primary checking accounts. I then cross-referenced the flight risk protocols in the file named charity_fraud_22.docx, which detailed Spencer's cowardly evasion path through the parking garage. I checked the terminated insurance liabilities neatly categorized in forensic_xp_22.docs, proving she was indeed completely devoid of medical coverage. Finally, I reviewed the hospital's standard eviction protocols for rejected VIP patients in the file named fed_audit_22.docx. Everything she said was completely accurate. She was entirely destitute. I slid the tablet back into my pocket. I reached into my purse, bypassing my checkbook, and pulled out a crisp, brand-new $100 bill from my emergency cash reserve. Brittany's eyes widened in sheer, pathetic desperation as she stared at the money. "This is not for you," I stated, my voice echoing with a cold, absolute authority that demanded total silence. "This is entirely for the innocent child you are about to bring into this world. That baby deserves a safe delivery regardless of the horrible decisions its parents made." I stepped forward and pressed the $100 bill firmly into Brittany's trembling, sweaty palm. "Take a taxi to St. Jude's," I ordered, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate or gratitude. "Get yourself checked into the public ward. Then you need to focus entirely on raising that child to be absolutely nothing like Spencer Blackwell." Brittany clutched the cash to her chest, sobbing with a mixture of immense relief and profound shame. She nodded frantically, unable to form words, before turning and hobbling as quickly as her contracting body would allow toward the side exit, desperate to escape the ruins of the empire she had tried to steal. I watched her go, feeling a deep, quiet peace settle firmly in my chest. I had not let their darkness corrupt my humanity. I had won on my own terms. I watched Brittany take 2 agonizing, shuffling steps toward the heavy revolving doors, her fingers clutching my $100 bill like a life preserver. A sudden sharp realization hit me, halting my breathing. Giving her my personal funds was a massive mistake. It was a temporary, meaningless bandage on a catastrophic wound. More importantly, it made me financially complicit in facilitating her quiet escape from accountability. I stepped quickly forward, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble tile, and snatched the crisp banknote right back out of her sweaty, trembling palm. Brittany gasped, stumbling backward against the structural pillar as another harsh labor contraction ripped through her abdomen. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, completely unable to process the sudden reversal. "No," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality as I folded the bill and slid it back into my pocket. "I am not paying for your taxi, Brittany. I will not spend a single cent of my hard-earned money to subsidize Spencer's catastrophic failures. You do not get to quietly disappear into the night using my cash." "Maddie, please," she whimpered, her legs shaking violently. "The baby is coming. I have absolutely nothing." "I am fully aware of your financial status," I replied, my tone crisp and authoritative. I turned my back to her and locked eyes with Alexander Reed. The hospital chairman was standing a few yards away, silently observing the immediate aftermath of the federal raid and the expulsion of the Blackwell matriarch. "Chairman Reed," I called out, projecting my voice across the quiet, highly secured lobby. Alexander straightened his impeccable suit jacket and walked toward me, his expression cautious but deeply respectful. "Agent Maddie, your operation today was remarkably efficient. You surgically removed a massive criminal liability from my institution. And in doing so, I saved this hospital from a catastrophic public relations nightmare and severe federal penalties." I pointed out, establishing my leverage with lethal, uncompromising precision. I kept the FBI raid strictly contained to Spencer Blackwell's specific accounts. I ensured the media outside remains entirely focused on the Blackwell family, keeping your hospital's overall reputation completely insulated from the fallout. Alexander nodded slowly, his sharp eyes evaluating me. "You did. The board of directors owes you a significant debt of gratitude." "I am calling in a fraction of that debt right now," I told him, gesturing sharply toward the groaning, sweating woman leaning against the pillar. "This woman is in active labor. She requires immediate medical admission and full maternal care." Brittany let out a loud, shuddering breath of relief, fresh tears spilling over her mascara-stained cheeks. She genuinely believed she was about to be escorted back up to the luxurious, silk-sheeted VIP maternity suite. She believed her nightmare was over. However, I continued, raising my hand to stop the approaching hospital orderlies. "She is not to be admitted as a private patient. She holds no insurance, and her assets are federally frozen. You will admit her strictly under the hospital's Indigent Single Mothers Fund." The relief vanished from Brittany's face, instantly replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Alexander Reed raised a single graying eyebrow. A slow, deeply appreciative smile spread across his weathered face. He understood exactly what I was doing. "A highly commendable charitable program," he noted smoothly, "designed specifically for destitute women with absolutely zero financial support or family backing." "Exactly," I confirmed, stepping closer to Brittany to ensure she heard every single word of her new reality. "She will receive standard baseline medical care. No private suite, no specialized catering, no private nursing staff. She will labor in a shared public ward surrounded by other charity cases." "You cannot do this to me," Brittany sobbed, gripping her swollen stomach tightly. "I am the mother of Spencer Blackwell's child. I belong in the premium wing." "Spencer Blackwell is a federal inmate who abandoned you in a parking garage," I reminded her mercilessly. "You are not a wealthy CEO's wife. You are a broke, uninsured single mother, relying entirely on the kindness of a charity program. Your delusions of grandeur end right here, right now." Alexander Reed snapped his fingers, summoning a stern-looking hospital administrator and two standard orderlies. They did not bring the plush, motorized premium transport chair used for high-paying clients. Instead, they pushed forward a battered, squeaky metal wheelchair. The administrator handed Brittany a rigid plastic clipboard containing a thick stack of vibrant yellow intake forms. "You must sign these financial declarations, Ms. Hayes," the administrator instructed in a flat-board voice. "You must legally attest that you are entirely destitute and require total state and charitable assistance for your medical procedures." Brittany's hands shook violently as she took the cheap plastic pen. Every stroke of her signature on those bright yellow forms was a permanent legal admission of her complete and utter ruin. Her fantasy of a glamorous aristocratic life was entirely dead. She signed away the last shred of her false pride, sobbing hysterically, as the reality of her self-inflicted poverty crashed down upon her shoulders. A nurse stepped forward and handed Brittany a folded garment. It was not the silk-embroidered robe provided in the VIP wing. It was a stiff, faded, generic cotton hospital gown. The rough, sterile fabric symbolized her permanent demotion to the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy. "Sit down," the orderly commanded briskly. Brittany collapsed into the squeaky metal wheelchair. She buried her face in the scratchy cotton gown, weeping with loud, uncontrollable despair. The orderlies spun the chair around and pushed her away from the opulent main lobby, steering her down a long, dimly lit corridor toward the crowded, chaotic public wards. I watched her disappear around the corner, feeling an immense, profound weight lift from my chest. I had not abandoned an innocent child, but I had firmly forced the mistress to face the brutal, uncompromising consequences of her own actions. The lobby fell quiet once again. The storm raged violently against the glass doors, but the air inside felt remarkably clean and purified. I turned back to the center of the room. Alexander Reed was still standing there. He had not moved a single inch. He was watching me with an expression of absolute transfixed fascination. He had witnessed me dismantle a corrupt billionaire, orchestrate a federal raid, expose a massive embezzlement scheme, evict a hostile matriarch, and handle a volatile medical crisis, all with lethal precision and absolute grace. I had not lost my temper. I had not raised my voice. I had controlled the entire battlefield. Alexander slowly unbuttoned his suit jacket. He reached down and picked up his expensive combination-locked leather briefcase from a nearby waiting chair. He set it down on a high marble counter and spun the brass dials with deliberate care. The locks clicked open with a sharp, satisfying snap. He reached inside the velvet-lined interior and pulled out a sleek, unmarked, heavy leather folder. He closed the briefcase, stepped forward, and extended the dark leather folder directly toward me. His eyes locked onto mine, burning with a serious, intense proposition. I looked down at the heavy, unmarked leather folder Alexander Reed held suspended between us. The polished brass corners caught the ambient light of the hospital atrium. I reached out and took it from his hands, the physical weight of the thick document significant and grounding. "Consider it a token of profound appreciation from the board of directors," Alexander said smoothly, his voice low and deliberate. "And a formal invitation. The private sector requires investigators with your specific brand of absolute, unflinching ruthlessness. Inside that folder are the finalized, countersigned copies of the federal asset forfeiture decrees you initiated against their syndicate. The comprehensive seizure of the Blackwell commercial real estate portfolio is officially filed under asset_forfeit_24.docx. The immediate liquidation of Spencer's remaining offshore family trusts is finalized in offshore_leak_24.docx. Furthermore, the permanent cancellation of their corporate holding licenses is legally logged as corp_license_24.docx. And finally, the strict federal injunction preventing any media retaliation or public statements from Spencer's defense team is fully executed under media_injunction_24.docx. Alexander smiled thinly, stepping back to give me space. "When you finish dismantling the criminal underworld, we have a permanent, highly compensated place for you here." I ran my hand over the smooth leather cover. It was a blank check. It was a golden parachute forged entirely from the ashes of the empire I had just burned down. I nodded slowly, holding his gaze with mutual silent respect. Before I could formulate my response, a sudden violent sound shattered the quiet serenity of the lobby. Thud, thud, thud. The frantic, desperate pounding echoed loudly against the thick, reinforced glass of the main entrance. Alexander and I both turned sharply toward the sound. Outside, the apocalyptic Chicago storm was reaching a fever pitch. Sheets of icy, freezing rain lashed against the pavement, transforming the hospital portico into a wind-whipped hurricane. Through the heavy, water-streaked glass, a horrifying spectacle was rapidly unfolding. Beatrice Blackwell had completely snapped. The former matriarch, a woman who had spent her entire existence obsessing over aristocratic perfection, social dominance, and immaculate appearances, was entirely undone. She had abandoned her cheap transport wheelchair. She was physically throwing her body against the automated glass doors, her wet palms slapping wildly against the transparent barrier separating her from salvation. She was soaked to the absolute bone. Her expensive tailored designer suit was plastered to her frail frame, ruined and stained with thick dirt from the flooded pavement. The icy downpour had completely washed away her pristine, heavily applied makeup, leaving dark, ghostly streaks of mascara running down her pale, wrinkled cheeks. Her perfectly coiffed hair hung in jagged, dripping strands across her face. She looked feral. She looked completely broken. Beatrice slammed her fists against the glass again, her mouth wide open in a primal, soundless scream. The automatic sensors of the doors had been locked down by hospital security during the federal raid, permanently denying her re-entry. She was trapped in the freezing deluge. Her legs gave out. Beatrice dropped hard onto her bare knees right into a massive freezing puddle on the concrete. She did not even flinch at the violent impact. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, pressing her wet, shivering face against the bottom pane of the glass. Her voice muffled heavily by the thick glass, and the roaring wind penetrated the lobby. It was a wretched, agonizing wail. "Maddie!" Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking with sheer panic and undeniable terror. "Maddie, please!" She clawed at the glass, her manicured fingernails scraping uselessly against the smooth, impenetrable surface. The absolute irony of the moment was staggering. The woman who had spent years calling me common, unworthy, and weak was now kneeling in dirty water, begging for my attention. "Help him!" Beatrice shrieked, her face contorted in pure, unadulterated agony. "You have the power. You have the federal clearance. Call the director. Call your agents. You can fix this, Maddie. You can bail Spencer out. Please, I am begging you." She was pleading for mercy directly from the executioner. In her shattered, desperate mind, she truly believed that family loyalty, the very concept she had twisted, corrupted, and weaponized against me for years, would somehow compel me to save her criminal son. She sobbed violently, pressing her hands together in a prayerful gesture, bowing her head toward the glass. "He is your husband," Beatrice wailed, her voice hoarse and raw. "Do not let them lock him away. Have mercy on us, Maddie. Have mercy." I slowly handed the leather folder back to Alexander Reed. He took it silently, stepping aside to give me a completely clear path. I turned and walked toward the entrance. My tailored suit was immaculate. My posture was perfectly straight. I stopped just inches from the interior side of the glass. I looked down at the pathetic, ruined woman sobbing in the mud. I did not feel a single ounce of anger, hatred, or even vindictive satisfaction. I felt absolute freezing indifference. It was the total absence of emotion. I raised my right hand and signaled to the armed security guard standing by the manual override controls. He immediately flipped the heavy steel switch. The heavy glass doors slid smoothly apart. The roaring, deafening noise of the torrential storm instantly flooded the lobby. A blast of freezing, rain-soaked wind whipped across my face, but I remained standing just inside the protective threshold of the awning. I was perfectly dry. I was perfectly secure. Beatrice gasped loudly as the doors opened. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, her soaked clothes dragging across the rough concrete. She reached her shaking, wrinkled hands out into the dry warmth of the lobby, desperately trying to grab the hem of my trousers. I took one single deliberate step backward. Her hands fell short, splashing into the shallow puddle gathering at the very edge of the welcome mat. "Maddie!" Beatrice choked out, looking up at me with wide, bloodshot eyes. "Please, use your connections. Make the calls. Save my boy." I looked down at her. I studied the deep, terrified lines on her face. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to endure the agonizing weight of my judgment while the freezing rain continued to batter her spine. "You were right, Beatrice." I said, my voice cutting through the roaring storm with lethal quiet precision. It was calm. It was devoid of all sympathy. It was absolute zero. Beatrice stopped sobbing for a fraction of a second, a fleeting, desperate glimmer of hope flashing in her eyes. She genuinely thought I was agreeing with her. She thought I was finally conceding to her matriarchal authority. I tilted my head, looking down at her with eyes as hard as polished steel. I delivered the final lethal callback. Leaving me was the smartest decision your son ever made. I watched the hope instantly die in her eyes. I watched her realize that this was not a rescue. This was an execution. Because if he had not... I continued, my words dropping like heavy stones onto her chest. I never would have gotten the clearance to burn this rotten family to the ground. Beatrice let out a ragged, suffocating gasp. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She realized that Spencer's betrayal was not his salvation. It was the exact catalyst for his absolute destruction. By throwing me away, they had handed me the matches and the gasoline. I did not wait for her to respond. I did not wait for another scream. I simply turned my back on her and signaled the guard. The heavy glass doors slid rapidly shut, sealing with a firm, decisive click. The roaring noise of the storm was instantly muted, trapping Beatrice Blackwell outside in the freezing rain, locked away in the permanent ruin of her own making. I turned away from the sealed glass doors, leaving the muffled, pathetic wails of Beatrice Blackwell to be swallowed entirely by the raging Chicago storm. The lobby was pin-drop quiet, the pristine marble floors reflecting the harsh overhead lights. Alexander Reed stepped into my line of sight. He had retrieved a sleek, unmarked leather folder from his briefcase, holding it out to me with a look of absolute, unwavering respect. You have dismantled a financial syndicate that eluded federal oversight for years. Alexander said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, empty atrium. Vanguard Health requires leadership with exactly your caliber of tactical brilliance and uncompromising integrity. We do not just need a competent auditor, Maddie. We need a visionary architect to rebuild our entire financial infrastructure from the ground up. I took the heavy folder from his hands, flipping open the cover. The crisp, thick parchment inside detailed a comprehensive, fiercely lucrative executive contract. The title printed at the very top of the page was bold, clear, and undeniable. Senior partner of Vanguard Health's financial wing. It was not just a job offer. It was an immediate ascension to the highest echelon of the corporate hierarchy. It granted me absolute operational control, sweeping authority over multi-billion-dollar portfolios, and a permanent bulletproof seat at the executive table. I pulled a sleek silver pen from the interior pocket of my tailored jacket. I did not hesitate. I did not ask for time to review the standard clauses. I knew my precise worth, and Alexander Reed clearly recognized it as well. I pressed the pen to the signature line, the dark ink flowing smoothly across the heavy paper, permanently sealing my new reality. I handed the signed contract back to him with a firm, confident nod. "Welcome to Vanguard Senior Partner," Alexander said, offering a decisive, respectful handshake. "My private car is waiting at the secure rear exit. Let us get you out of this miserable storm." I walked beside him, the sharp click of my heels ringing out across the marble like a victory march. We bypassed the chaotic front entrance, stepping seamlessly through the restricted VIP corridors and out into a covered, highly secure private loading bay. A sleek, midnight black chauffeured luxury sedan sat idling, the powerful engine purring softly. The driver immediately opened the rear door. I slid into the plush, heated leather seats, the ambient warmth wrapping around me instantly. As the car pulled smoothly away from the curb, I looked out the tinted window at the heavy sheets of rain washing over the city. I was leaving the wretched, toxic wreckage of the Blackwell Empire firmly in my rearview mirror. The ensuing weeks delivered a rapid, incredibly satisfying execution of absolute justice. The federal indictments fell upon the remaining Blackwells like a swift, merciless guillotine, severing them completely from their stolen privilege. Spencer Blackwell's highly publicized federal trial was a spectacular, humiliating disaster for him. The prosecuting attorneys utilized every single piece of evidence I had meticulously gathered. The offshore routing numbers, the dummy vendor accounts, and the digital forensic logs were completely irrefutable. Facing an insurmountable mountain of proof, his expensive defense attorneys immediately folded, advising him to take a plea deal that he arrogantly refused. The judge looked down from the bench with total disgust, delivering the final crushing blow. Spencer was convicted of massive corporate wire fraud and sentenced to 10 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The untouchable CEO was permanently stripped of his tailored suits and forced into a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. The sharp click of steel handcuffs snapping around his wrists echoed through the courtroom, locking him away in a sterile concrete cell for the next decade. Beatrice Blackwell experienced a downfall so steep and profoundly degrading, it shattered her psychological reality entirely. The federal government aggressively seized every single asset tied to the Blackwell name. Her sprawling historic estate, her fleet of luxury vehicles, her offshore trust funds, and her priceless jewelry collection were all instantly liquidated to pay back the defrauded charities and investors. The former aristocratic matriarch was forcefully evicted from her mansion by armed marshals. Destitute and completely abandoned by her high society friends, Beatrice was forced to relocate to a cramped, poorly ventilated, low-income apartment complex on the industrial outskirts of the city. The woman who once hosted lavish catered galas for the city's elite was now reduced to clipping coupons and relying entirely on government food stamps to survive. The absolute humiliation of presenting an EBT card at a discount grocery store checkout line became her new, permanent, inescapable reality. Caroline faced an equally brutal, uncompromising reckoning. When the full extent of her criminal embezzlement from the pediatric charity became public knowledge, her husband Jamal reacted with swift, lethal legal precision. He immediately filed for divorce, invoking an ironclad morality clause hidden within their prenuptial agreement. Because her actions constituted a severe felony, the clause was triggered instantly, completely nullifying any claim she had to Jamal's extensive wealth. She was entirely cut off. Jamal locked her out of their luxury penthouse, froze all shared credit accounts, and seized full custody of their assets. Caroline was left with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back, staggering legal debts, and an impending federal trial of her own. She was completely ruined, permanently stripped of the unearned luxury she had so viciously flaunted. Sitting in the back of Alexander's sedan, watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked glass, I felt a profound, untouchable sense of peace. The storm outside was violent, but my internal world was perfectly clear, highly structured, and totally secure. I had walked into their den of vipers as a target, and I had walked out as the apex predator. Never fear the moment toxic people throw you to the wolves. When manipulative, arrogant individuals attempt to destroy your life, they often hand you the exact tools required for your own liberation. They underestimate your resilience, your intelligence, and your infinite capacity for survival. Sometimes the mud they push you into is exactly what you need to build your empire. I did not just survive the Blackwell family's betrayal, I weaponized it. I used their own corruption, their own rampant greed, and their own blind arrogance to dismantle their legacy and construct a fortress of my own making. You hold the pen to your own story. Never let anyone else dictate your final chapter. If you found satisfaction in this journey of absolute justice and unyielding strength, please hit the like button right now. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on the Blackwell family's ultimate spectacular downfall, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of resilience, retribution, and rising from the ashes. The most profound lesson from Maddie's journey is that betrayal does not have to be your breaking point. It can be the ultimate catalyst for your personal empowerment. When toxic individuals try to tear you down, they inadvertently hand you the very tools needed to build your own fortress. True justice rarely requires sinking to the level of your abusers. Instead, it is found in rising above them, maintaining your unwavering integrity, and letting the natural consequences of their own arrogance dismantle their lives, while you secure your brilliant future. What is the greatest lesson you have learned from overcoming betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments below.